We'll see.
Do you disagree that that's what the house was in August 2015? Just in setup? I mean, not all the pictures, but just for the things that look very, you got a picture taken from, so this is like how that is set up. And there's that picture taken from the concrete sunrise, August 14, 2014. Yeah, I would agree that, let me just, if you got it from the search warrant, then it looks right to me, yeah. I can't see this, but I assume it's there. The upside right there, right? So we're just standing behind it, right? No, I genuinely agree. Yeah. You wouldn't.
Did we need to talk before we start up with you?
Please, just that we were hoping, I don't want to run afoul of the
Wait. Don't run afoul of Miss Grigsby either.
She's been heckling me this morning. I might be willing to. We'd like to have our expert witnesses review testimony that's been provided, but I don't want to run afoul of the sequestration order. My recollection is that previously the court ordered that that's acceptable, that we can do that, but
that's not a problem.
We're too deep into this.
But how are you doing the testimony?
I'm sorry.
How are you having them review the testimony? Are you asking for real time? Are you paying for this?
No, through the wonders of expanded media coverage, starting with Grigsby, but they're all available. Every minute of this trial out there on YouTube.
Forgot all about it. Mr. Johnson?
Yes, Your Honor, just to be clear, I think what the court's saying is that experts can watch experts despite the sequestration order.
Experts can watch experts.
Okay. And that's the extent of it?
That's the extent of it.
Thank you, Judge.
Okay. So with that, are we ready to bring up the jury?
Thank you, Judge.
Okay. Thank you. You can, yeah, that's fine. Wherever you want to be. That's fine. And just so both sides, you don't need this on the record. Both sides know it's a hard stop at 11:50. We have a juror that has to do something right at the end. I guess. All right, thank you. Rise for the jury. All right, we can all be seated. Ms. Gumman, you're still under oath. And whenever you're ready, Mr. Moran.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Morning.
So as I was walking the dog last night, something was occurring to me about the discussion around large source scent. You're testifying about that on direct and a little bit in some of the questions that I asked you. My understanding of large source scent is that ideally, and if Biddy or Molly was performing properly, that she would only be identifying large source scent, right?
My effort is to only have them identify larger sources, not a drop of blood.
Because hair and blood and skin cells are ubiquitous. That this room is certainly covered in it.
Correct.
So the reason you want large source scent and not these smaller, the dog to go past these smaller things, is you believe that's more useful with human remains dogs. And then you can say they're not alerting to things that are ubiquitous in the environment.
That would be my effort.
And I need to remember to use 5 cents instead of 10 cent words. Ubiquitous means everywhere, right?
What's your question about ambiguous?
Just ubiquitous.
Oh,
means
I'm sorry.
everywhere, so that we're not using words that might be confusing.
Okay, and so what's the question?
Ubiquitous means everywhere. That's how you mean it when you're saying hair, teeth, blood, skin cells are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. That smell, that scent is everywhere.
That could potentially be everywhere, yes.
So what was confusing then to me is that when the dog alerted to the blue shirt but not the green shirt, with which it had been in a bag for many months, but the dog then alerted to where the blue shirt had been, that's the dog alerting to small source, right?
I would, if you want my read on that.
Well, my read on this, and tell me if
Your
this
read doesn't. Okay.
is mistaken. I want to co-opt a narrative that what is being deposited by the blue shirt onto the ground would be volatile organic compounds. Arpad Voss has identified 478 of them, right?
Yes.
So what's happening is that these volatile organic compounds, these small things dogs are sensing, got onto the ground would be some part of the explanation, right? And that's why the dog alerted to the ground.
I don't know why she didn't hit on the green shirt. I couldn't tell you in a million years.
But you would agree that what is happening after the blue shirt's been on the ground and removed, taken away, and the dog is alerting to the ground, that's not a large source, right?
That is correct.
So at least on August the 5th, 2013, there was one occasion where Biddy is alerting to something that is not a large source scent, correct?
Sure. Yes.
There was some discussion, quite a bit of discussion yesterday about how you mean to minimize the amount of information you have before you go into a sniff, so that you're not cueing the dog, right?
Correct.
Before you arrived in Colorado, though, you were contacted by investigator Goldbright, right?
I don't recall if I spoke directly with her on the phone or in person.
It may have been Ralston first.
It may have been, yes.
Okay. So Ralston, someone you work with, he was contacted by law enforcement in Colorado, right?
That's my understanding.
And then he communicated to you the information that they were interested in having you work with them to find.
On a water search, yes.
And described to you that a boy was missing and it was in Colorado, Vallecito area. So you got some information from Ralston, right?
I don't remember the exact discussion, but I would have had a rough idea that there was a missing person.
And then that comes into greater focus as you start interacting with law enforcement in Colorado, right?
Yes,
And you testified that your work on this case, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your work on this case was all volunteer basis, right? You just have your costs covered.
that's correct.
So do costs involve an hourly rate?
No,
Not at the time.
no. When I'm searching, the only thing I ask law enforcement to cover is our gas, hotel, or, and that's usually the only thing we charge. So the act of searching with the dog is volunteer.
At the time, were you taking vacation then to come do that work?
It was either scheduled on a variety of vacation days, days off, or comp days, but work did not give me time to go.
That's different now, though, because Canine Search Solutions is an LLC, right?
It has been since 2005.
And LLC as opposed to 501c3 charity organization, right?
Correct. It is not a 501c3.
Okay. So there is payment associated with the work you do for Canine Search Solutions. It's in fact your job now.
It's a part-time business, and I'm not a very good business person.
Okay.
So the only monies I usually make are from doing training. I don't feel like I could ever come up with a price for searching for a missing person.
When you were interacting with law enforcement as you're arriving for this volunteer work, you were informed that the child was deceased. That's obvious, right? That's the only reason they would need you involved is because they're looking for someone they believe to be deceased.
They believed he was deceased, yes.
And you were aware that the father was suspected of having caused the child's death?
I'm sure that they had communicated that to me, yes.
And if they hadn't, it became crystal clear as your dog is alerting to his clothing, and then his truck, his house, the rest of it, right?
I don't know if crystal clear is the right word.
Okay. I mean, you're traveling quite a distance from Wisconsin to be here to do this, right?
Yes.
And as you mentioned, I believe yesterday, was that you knew that remains had been recovered on Middle Mountain, right?
At some point, and I just don't remember the timeline of when those remains were recovered, but I did learn it at some point during the investigation.
After the interaction with Ralston, after some phone contact with the La Plata County Sheriff's Office, then you get to Colorado in August 2013.
Yes.
And had a briefing, right?
Yes.
And at the briefing, it's not a discussion about the weather and the Milwaukee Brewers. It's a discussion about this is what we need you to do. This is what we think happened, right?
As my general rule, most law enforcement don't have a working knowledge of some of the things that the human remains detection dog can offer. So the briefing is usually me explaining about decomposing human remains and that the dog is simply information to possibly either eliminate an area or that the dog may provide indications, however, to be aware of what else could be causing it and what I refer to as anomalies. And then at some point they'll talk through the agency's knowledge of where the person was last seen, and my practice is to suggest we can sniff a vehicle, a house, a business to either find something or move on from it, knowing that they're looking for information.
I'm referring to the briefing that law enforcement discusses providing you.
Sure.
You're talking about your general practice.
Yes.
Do you recall, or would it be better for you to inquire with these law enforcement officials about what they told you?
You know, that was 8 years ago, and I'm over 50.
Right.
So I don't recall the details of what they told me, just that I'm sure they communicated that they believed or were concerned that Dylan was last at the home, and did he go missing on his own, or did something happen to him by his father?
Mm-hmm.
But it'd probably be better for you to get that information of what they told me.
Because when you're talking about your general practice, you're talking about a general practice that's been honed and refined over the course of the last 8 years, right? You've gotten better at dog handling, obviously, over the course of the last several years.
My practice of talking to law enforcement to try to educate them about the dogs, I started doing probably in like 2006, 7, 8. And then absolutely, I've learned from every case and tried to improve my skill set.
When you went into Area 51, so that's the name of the area, also the Pepsi building, and sniffed the clothing, nothing was video recorded, right?
Not that I'm aware of.
And that's something that, I mean, you saw law enforcement had video cameras when they were with you, right? And they just didn't use them in Area 51.
I don't recall if there was a discussion about videotaping or not.
There's a videotape that was taken when you got to the house, the entrance video and the exit video. You're in the video.
Oh.
Do you not recall that Mr. Cowling was speaking like that?
I don't recall a video of it.
But it makes sense to you, being at the sheriff's office and knowing what you know about law enforcement, that somewhere in the buildings that they had exclusive control over, there was a video camera, right?
There's always video cameras possibility nowadays.
Sure. Or just people's phones.
Yes.
And none of the work you did was videotaped, right?
I'm not aware that they videotaped anything, no.
And you didn't suggest videotaping, correct?
I don't recall if I did or not. If they bring it up, we talk about the pros and cons to it.
Certain handlers think that videotaping is appropriate in some contexts and less in other contexts. So as I understand it, if you're doing like the sniffing of items in a police garage, that's a situation where you can have a camera in a sort of subtle spot, and it's more acceptable in the minds of handlers to do videotaping in that context. Do you agree?
In my early days of searching, they would videotape, and the camera just ended up taking a lot of back shots. And then the concern is always, are they in our way? And I don't feel like it's my place to make that decision, especially when I'm out of Wisconsin, where the legal system might be a little bit different. So in answer to your question, I don't recall if I suggested it or I had any conversation about that.
Two of the best practices you implement to avoid queuing and false alerts are to authentically go in with no concept of what should be expected, as we've been discussing.
Yes.
And then the second is, in a house, you want to be in and out within a short period of time, right?
If I'm not seeing the dog getting any odor, I'm not going to linger in a house. That's correct.
So as you put it in the past, either you get something right away or there's nothing there for the dog to test, right?
That is part of it, yes.
So you entered the driveway at Mr. Redwine's house, 2343 County Road 500, with your dog at 1:10 p.m., August 5th, 2013, right?
Are you looking at my report? Yes.
Okay. And you'd agree that house isn't very big?
Agreed.
The dog gave indications before entering the house, as you've mentioned under us.
Yes, on the outside.
After those indications, you went in the house.
Yes,
Initially, you had the dog sniff the first and second floor, correct?
I started in the first floor and then the second, yes.
All right, so you would characterize that as a cursory sniff, correct?
I would have allowed her to just move through because dogs are curious.
During that first cursory sniff, the dog did not give any final train indication, correct?
Correct.
Then, after the dog did not find anything right away, you did a slowed sniff pattern, right?
Yes.
And you were not the only one in the house while you did this second slowed sniff pattern, right?
Law enforcement would have been present, yes.
So during the certification process, when another handler is working a dog, you always stay at the threshold of a room so that your body language would not cue the dog, right?
I tried to do that, yes.
The location and source of odor in Mr. Redwine's house, you would characterize as unknown despite the briefing, right? You didn't know where blood had been found in the house, right?
I don't recall ever having that information before going in.
You would also agree, though, that whenever you're doing unknown stuff, so that's what this house represents, is unknown stuff, right?
Correct.
When you're doing unknown stuff, you try to be mindful of what the person that's setting it up could be relaying, correct?
Say that last part.
Correct. Whenever you're doing unknown stuff, you try to be mindful of what the person that's setting it up could be relaying.
Oh, relaying. To me?
Yeah. Or, I'm sorry, not you, the dog.
Oh. I'm not sure what your question is.
So this is something I want to know if you still agree with. So my information is that you once testified, whenever we're doing unknown stuff, we try to be mindful of what the person that's setting it up could be relaying. Do you still agree with that?
Oh, yes.
In a certification scenario, the person who's setting it up is someone who has information about where the dog might alert or where the scent source is, right?
Yes.
And so when investigator Cowling and investigator Goldbright are in this small house with you, they are potentially relaying information to the dog, right?
To the dog? Maybe.
Sure. I mean, in the way that it would be at a certification scenario where you would try to stay away because if you know where the scent source is, you don't want to cue that dog and indicate to the dog where it is, right?
Oh, yes, I see what you're saying.
That's why you stay at the threshold in these certification scenarios. But in this instance, people who had information about where things had previously been found were in the room, right?
They were in the house. I don't recall where they were in there.
Because you're intent on working the dog and you're not paying attention to what they're doing, right?
I'll usually not pay much attention and just ask that everybody stay out of my way in the dog's way.
One way we might know if someone other than yourself is consciously or unconsciously cueing is the videotape the sniffing procedure, right?
You mean if they had videotaped, you could watch that and say, oh, that person just cued the dog?
Yeah. Oh. I haven't said that in a while. Yes.
Midwest.
Right.
Videotaping could always show what happened, and then it's left to interpretation by what people are seeing. I don't think I answered your question.
Well, you would agree, though, that a video recorder was available but not used by the law enforcement officials, right?
I'm assuming they had video cameras. Yeah.
I request that you guys put up the liability chart. Give you exhibit number for social. 7? We discussed this a little bit on board here. The judge decided it was preferable for me to do this in cross-examination. So I want to just reorient everybody to what this is. You created this document. You titled it the liability chart, as you see there at the top. Is that right?
Yes.
Didn't write the word chart in there. It just says liability. And you agreed with me yesterday that in creating a reliability chart, a reliability log, it's important to be careful, right?
Yes.
And it's important to be accurate.
Yes.
And that's especially important when it becomes something as this is, an exhibit for the court, correct?
Yes.
And this exhibit 467 that's been provided by the court that you created is similar to one that you provided in June of 2019 to the court, right?
Yes.
And between June and today, at the request of the prosecution, you went and made modifications to the liability chart. Is that right?
Yes.
But you didn't make any modification to the entry that is there at May 1st, 2008, right?
I did not change the failed certification on May 1st, 2008.
No,
Is that,
the fact that you write here that certification is in bold. Can I have you scroll down on this chart to the last page? Mission approach.
Yes. Excuse me, hold on a second. Oh. It's on.
You've written here certification in bold, right?
yes,
So like here, where certification was achieved, 4 out of 4, in bold, right?
yes,
And on this occasion, same thing, right?
yes.
Okay, scroll back up, please. But there's nothing here at line 9, the May 1st, 2008 date that would indicate that this was a failed certification, right?
Correct.
And if certification is in bold, there's nothing differentiating the failed certification from the accomplished certification, right?
Correct.
And this was something that you were made aware of back in 2019, do you recall?
Made aware of which
You
part?
became aware, you quote, made a mistake entering the data with this reliability chart, right?
Yes,
And it was because on that day you testified that your dog only had one false alert, right?
yes,
And your chart still says that there's only one false alert, right?
yes,
And you testified that it's more dangerous for a dog to have false alerts than misses, right?
yes,
Because a miss means that the dog just walked past something, correct?
yes,
But a false alert means the dog said there's dead body or human remains here, and there is not, correct?
correct.
On June 27, 2019, at that hearing, it was pointed out to you that there were more false alerts.
In your opinion, yes.
It's not just my opinion, though. Would you agree?
Section, that question is improper, Judge.
I think that is improper.
Right.
You can ask a different question.
Sure. I'll withdraw that. If I could have council put up 468. And it's page 16,746. May I approach?
Yes.
So can you tell us what this is?
Yes, that is from May 1st, 2008, Molly's first attempt at certification with North American Police Working Dog. The master trainer has a documented form, and it shows her train final responses that were correct, her misses, and the false alert.
False alert.
Oh,
That's why she failed the test, because there was a second false alert,
yes,
right?
yes.
So if we could go back to the reliability chart, please. So all of the ones that are in bold are instances where someone else is watching, right?
The bold would be the certifications annual, and the rest are blind from someone else setting them out and me working it unknown. So the unbolded ones, there's always somebody watching.
So the ones in bold, there are charts and certification documents being created by someone else, right?
Yes,
The ones that are not in bold, you're recording the information, right?
yes.
And you would agree, looking at the certification chart, that there is no way a reader looking at this would be able to determine that there was a failed certification on that day, right? You would just be looking for things in bold to see what days there were certifications, right?
You mean the intent of the form?
If you look at.
You are correct. There's no way for them to know that that was a failed certification.
And this reliability chart was once before provided to the court. You've acknowledged that, right?
Yes,
And you acknowledge that you were aware of the mistake, but this was never corrected, right?
I guess I never understood until now what you're talking about. So no, it was not corrected.
Do you recall saying in your testimony in June that she had one false positive, similar to how you testified today?
That's how I recall it, yes.
And then it was pointed out to you that there were more, right?
If somebody pointed that out to me, it still didn't dawn on me.
Okay.
Kind of thick-headed, I guess.
You would agree that that document talking about how there were 2 false alerts that day had to sign the document, right?
You mean, did the master trainer sign it?
Yes, no.
Yes.
And when there's 2 false alerts, that means certification is denied.
I would have to reread the rules, but she missed and false,
They
so we failed.
In certification, you agree that you're not the person who gets to decide whether something is a hit or a miss, right?
In certification, that's correct.
Somebody else decides it, but in your training, you decide, right?
Yes,
And when you fill up the reliability log, you made that final determination on the vast majority of it.
yes.
After the failed 2008 certification, you tried again, obviously, right?
Yes.
And you did another certification and received a Cadaver Proficiency certification after that failed test, right?
The Cadaver Proficiency was through Canine Search Solutions. It's not a national cert.
Right. And you're the founder and owner of Canine Search Solutions, right?
Yes,
So after that failed test, then there was a certification provided by your business to your dog, right?
no, that wasn't considered a national certification.
I'm not asking whether it was a national certification. I'm just asking whether your business certified your dog after there was a failure in May 2000.
It did not. It's a proficiency test. She was not considered certified until September of 2008, when she performed at the next certification.
Mission approach.
Yes.
I'm going to show you one called People's Exhibit 4, Discovery Page 1200. And that's you to see line 17 here, which is highlighted in green.
It reads Cadaver. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Yes.
So after the May 1st, 2008 failed certification, what happened was there was a Cadaver Proficiency certification provided by Canine Search Solutions, right?
Yes.
And that was in September of 2008, right?
Yes.
So your dog was certified by your business after this failure at the national certification level, right?
It was a proficiency certification.
Provided by your business.
Yes.
The first time the dog was deployed in this case was August 5th, 2013, 106 days from when Dylan went missing. Would you agree?
Yes.
And you would also agree that you have never placed remains for 22 hours or less, removed those remains, and returned 106 days later to see if the dog would give a final chain response. That's never been done in a controlled environment, has it?
Like a blind problem.
Sure.
I don't recall doing that far out.
And nothing with the specifics that would be tied to this case, right?
Ask that part again.
Sure. You had this dog, the dog lived with you at your home, right?
Yes.
So you had the capacity to create an experiment where that dog demonstrated the ability to do what is claimed to have happened here, right?
Did I have the ability to set that up?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know that I could have had a whole body. I don't have access to a whole body to set that up. So no, I was unable to do that.
Okay. But you didn't try it with like a leg. You've had access to a leg before, right?
Yes. I have done trainings where we've put out source for a period of time and then removed it. I don't recall if I've ever done it with Molly for the 100 plus days.
So there was never an effort to prove the dog's ability to do what's claimed in this case, right?
No.
And there was some discussion yesterday about the carpet square study in Germany, where bodies were laid on pieces of carpet, see if the dogs could come back and identify residual lingering scent. Remember?
Yes.
About that? But you'd agree that that German study did not span as much time as is involved here, right? 65 days was the outer limit of how much time removed in that case, right?
In that experiment, they did not go beyond the 60+ days. That's correct.
They also were learning that the dogs had more failure in that test when there was a ventilated area, when there was any breeze through there, that interfered with the dog's ability to make those hits.
On the carpet square research,
Yes, ma'am.
I don't recall that information.
Suffice to say, since you haven't done this testing, that the prosecution never asked you to prove in a controlled setting the dog to do what was claimed to, right?
They did not ask me to prove that. That's correct.
And Ms. Corcoran, Ms. Gunning, still blowing me.
Gummin.
When we reached out to you on a couple of occasions, you didn't want to speak with us, right?
That's correct.
And you said it was really deeply ingrained in you not to speak to people before the trial, right?
Yes.
Being ingrained that you do not speak to people before trial is not entirely true, though, right? That's just as it applies to defense counsel, correct?
In my history, being a law enforcement officer, I'm not accustomed to speaking with the defense prior to trial. That's correct.
So when you're saying it's really deeply ingrained in you not to speak to people before trial, that doesn't include the current on multiple occasions, right?
Yes, and they're people.
You previously testified that there are 478 separate compounds that emit from decomposing human bodies. Is that right?
Correct.
And they change over time.
Correct.
But you don't know what those compounds are, right?
What's your question about the compound?
Let me ask you this. In training, you don't get your dog's nose on bodies after the person recently died, right? There's always some delay between when someone passes and when you're able to start using the body for training your dog, right?
In training, that's correct.
So the earliest you've ever gotten a body is what? A body part.
Oh, a body part. Back then or now? Probably back then. I believe, we were able to obtain through an anatomical society a leg that was harvested, and then the dog was exposed to that from the skin, from the skin all the way through. But I don't recall how far out from the harvesting to when she was exposed to it.
Fair to say that at least 48 hours.
Sure. Yes.
And likely longer than that.
Yes.
So in this case, where there's under the prosecution theory, a decomposing body for somewhere well under 24 hours, your dog's never been exposed to those conditions.
In training?
Yes, ma'am.
Or the real world?
In training.
I don't recall, and I've trained on where bodies have been removed through my department, but I can't remember specifically how fresh that was. But I think it's safe to say after 24 hours.
Would you agree that many of the compounds, those 478 separate compounds, exist in nature? For instance, decomposing plant matter.
Are you talking about vegetational methane?
Yes, ma'am.
Vegetational methane is present out in the environment. That's correct.
Vegetational methane is emitted by decomposing bodies, and it's emitted by vegetation.
I don't know that you want me to speak on that science.
I'm not going any deeper than that.
Oh,
You're
okay.
aware of this, right? You testified to it in the past.
That,
Objection, Judge. If he's gonna ask a question like that, the witness should be able to explain. She clearly knows the answer. He's only asking one question that he wants a yes or no answer to. So, if he's breaching the science, the witness should be able to explain.
Go ahead and just answer the question how you want to answer the question.
can you ask me the question again?
I think we're there. You're agreeing that vegetational methane is in the environment and emitted by decomposing bodies, correct?
I think methane is a component of human remains, and vegetational methane is out in the environment.
Right.
Um,
Same compounds make it up, correct?
similar compounds.
And those compounds, when they interact with the olfactory senses of the dog, it's the same molecule, same volatile organic compound in the air that we experience now, and dogs experience smell, correct?
Dogs can smell vegetational methane, yes.
In this case, you recommended involving Dr. Arpad Boss, right?
I would have given his information as another possible tool.
And he's the individual who is working on identifying, how do you put it, human death.
Arpad Voss is a forensic anthropologist who has done extensive research on identifying the chemical makeup of the odor of human remains.
And in this case, he recommended that a vacuum be put in the Dodge and that used to try to gather the volatile organic compounds, right?
I don't recall, but I'm assuming I would have explained that he's another resource or his attempts to gather the odor.
You recall explaining that what Dr. Voss does is, and what your dog does is different in that Dr. Voss's air sampling is backed by science, right?
The rest, he is a scientist, so it would be backed by science, yes.
And that's another one of those outcomes of the investigation that you were not made aware of, whether or not they came up with anything that was of evidentiary value in putting a vacuum in the Dodge.
I don't have any knowledge of that.
Before departing from Mr. Redwine's house in Vicedo, after your dog had alerted to the clothing, was there any effort to corroborate the dog's alerts before going to his home?
Corroborate the alerts of the clothing?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know. I simply did that sniff.
So in your presence, there was no luminol applied, there was no phenolphthalein, there was nothing applied to see if there could be a presumptive confirmation of what your dog had indicated?
No.
When you got to Mr. Redwine's house, he freely allowed you to walk about the property, right? That was your understanding, at least. You heard someone say, yes, I received the phone.
Yes.
And the information you had was that was Mr. Redwine giving his consent to allow you to search his home and property.
Yes.
The second call was made after your dog was walked around the yard, and he agreed again, sure, go in my house, right?
Yes.
The first final trained response, when you got out to the 2343 County Road 500 property, was on the southeast side of the house, right?
Yes.
You didn't observe any human remains at that location.
I did not.
Then the dirt below the staircase, the dog alerted there, right?
Yes.
And again, there was no human remains observed at that location.
I did not observe any remains.
And you would agree that some trainers who are not fortunate enough to have legs provided to them have to use things like grade soil to train the dog on smells of human remains, right?
That is a tool or an aid that some people will use to train their dogs.
And what they're doing there is they're using soil beneath where there was decomposition, and because of the liquid, fat, and the other materials that gravity pulls into the earth, that's why grave soil can be used, right?
Yes.
More on that in a moment, but with respect to the front doormat, you mentioned that the dog alerted to the front doormat inside and outside. Is that right?
Yes.
But there were no remains observed on that mat.
I didn't see anything.
And at least in your presence, there was no luminol or phenolphthalein applied to see if there were human remains that could be detected on those mats with presumptive tests.
I did not observe any tests being done.
Were you there when the threshold was removed and taken out of Mr. Redwine's doorway?
No.
Makes sense that might have happened, though, because the dog alerted on the threshold.
Does it make sense that they would check there? Yes.
And when you were in the house, did you wear a protective covering over your shoes?
I don't believe so.
And did any other law enforcement official?
I don't recall.
And this is a grim way to put it. It's someone else's language, but sometimes law enforcement officials walk in areas where there are brains that might get on their boots.
Correct.
You mentioned that the dog gave a final trained response in the creek, right?
At the creek, yes.
So got into the creek, right?
I don't recall if she stepped in there, but she did give a trained final response that she detected the odor of human remains along the creek.
I wanted to check this.
Sure.
So I'm sorry, your recollection is that the dog alerted at the creek, but not necessarily in the creek?
It was a real small body of water. I don't recall if she stepped in or if she stood over it.
Would it refresh your recollection to take a look at your report?
Absolutely.
Page 2733.
Yes.
So Molly stepped down into the creek, correct?
Yes.
And she smelled the top of the water, right?
Yes.
She looked right at you after smelling the stream. Yep.
Yes.
And after she looked at you, she gave a final trained response that she detected human remains in that creek.
In that area of the water in the creek, yes.
And were there any human remains in the creek that you saw?
I did not see any human remains.
My recollection of your testimony from Mr. Johnson was that someone washing their hands in the creek 109 days prior would not have left the smell of decomposing humans in that creek, right?
I'm hard pressed to think that would cause an indication.
There was also some discussion about whether the remain site that's up on Middle Mountain or a watershed could create the smell of human remains in the creek. But when we're talking about a watershed that starts a mile and a half away and is not definitively linked to this stream, you would also be hard pressed to say that that's not runoff from Middle Mountain getting into that creek and into the dog's mouth.
I would have to see a map, but let me clarify. If the odor on the mountain was draining into that creek, I couldn't say unless I saw a map, but if you're saying it was a mile and a half away and there's no tributary, I would have to guess that was not connected.
And also, and being from Wisconsin, you have better familiarity with waterways. We have less of it out here, but did you observe the bridge as you were coming into Mr. Redwine's house on the east side of his home? So there's the bridge over the creek in his yard, which would be to the west of County Road 500, but there's also a bridge 100 yards south with a river running under it. Do you observe that? Do you remember you parked near that river?
I don't remember seeing a river. I just recall that there was a small creek.
You would agree with me, though, if there was a river to the east, that river would be between the creek and Middle Mountain, where you were told bodies or remains had been recovered. Right?
Objection. She testified she hasn't seen anything.
Yeah, I think if you want to get something in like that, you're gonna have to do it through somebody else.
Let me ask it this way then. If there was a river between the slope where there were remains, would the remains run into that river, or would they jump the river into a creek on the other side of the river?
The odor of human remains would not necessarily jump and fall in a creek.
So with respect to this creek that no human remains were observed in, where the dog did a final trained response, would you agree that the weather conditions on August 5th, 2013 were 80 degrees and clear sky?
I would have to review my report.
Would you agree with me that it was a warm August day?
It didn't necessarily stand out to me whether it was warm or not. I don't recall.
Permission to refresh your recollection. Go ahead. Yeah,
Which day? You mean August? Thank you. I would have to see the rest of the report. Sometimes I put the weather at the beginning, and sometimes I put the weather, and because it's a lengthy report, can I see the page before?
Are you remembering it was cold on that August day?
I don't recall it being cold. Nope. The weather conditions on the 5th were in the 80s.
Warm day to be wearing a fur coat?
Oh, yes.
Objection of relevance, Judge. We're going on,
I think
we
we
can
can
move
move off.
hours now, and we're talking about fur coats.
Well, you can move off the weather, I think, Mr. Moran. I think you've established
I'm
what
off
you need
the
to.
weather. I've established what I need. So just to expedite this, I won't go through each of these individual 6 spots, but would you agree that there were 6 different final trained responses outside the house before you sought permission to go in Mr. Redwine's house? Those being east, southeast side of the house, below staircase, landing of the outside stairs, front doormat, in the creek, and the shed.
6 indications, trained final responses outside the house, yes.
And no human remains observed in any of those spots,
That is correct.
but still asked to go in Mr. Redwine's house. Yes?
Did I ask to go in? No.
Well, you
Oh.
suggested that it'd be a good idea now that we've got all these alerts outside the house, right?
I would have explained that we could certainly ask and go in there to see if there's any information to gather.
You went into the house, you were in the house between 2 and 3 p.m., correct?
Yes.
And as you've mentioned, the best practice is in a house, you're in and out within a short period of time, correct?
Yes.
You get something right away, or there's nothing there, right?
Yes.
First, you did a cursory sniff, and then withdrawn. Standing next to something too long can cue a dog to make a false alert, right?
It's possible, yes.
Subtle facial expressions cue a dog.
Can subtle,
Objection asked and answered.
You're right. I'll move on. The dog alerted Mr. Redwine's bathroom, right?
yes.
Objection asked and answered. We've talked about all of this, Judge.
Well, but
I know it was
he
talking
may be,
about, pardon me.
okay, he may be trying to get into something, and if he is, it's appropriate. You gonna talk about the bathroom? Yes, sir. Okay.
And you used the lady nicking her leg shaving in a bathtub as a possible source of the odor of human remains in the bathroom, right?
That can occur, yes.
You, in the hour you were at the house, observed the dog give a generalized indication of odor near a washroom.
Yes.
You would agree with me that blood, skin cells, other detritus from everyday life end up in and around washing machines, right?
Yes.
And there were no human remains observed at the washing machine, right?
Correct.
So then, after all of these alerts at the house where no human remains were observed, the next day, August 6th, we go up to Middle Mountain, right?
Yes.
And there were several alerts on Middle Mountain by the dog, correct?
Yes.
And there were, I think, 13 final trained responses, right?
The first day, I think there were 8.
Okay. That's right. The first day, 8, then the next day, some more, right?
4 more the second day.
And you didn't see any remains at any of those locations, is that right?
I did not.
And the dog didn't alert to any precise location where remains had previously been recovered, right?
That you would have to ask someone else.
A possibility does exist for a dog, though. You testified on direct about how ancient graves are sometimes sought out by people with human remains dogs, right? Right?
Yes.
And also, as we were discussing a moment ago, grave soil is created when there's decomposition over a spot on the ground, right?
Yes.
So it makes sense that if there were locations where remains had been recovered, that beneath that spot is human decomposition, wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
So the dog should have the capacity of alerting on that precise spot, right?
They may have the capacity to do that. Yes.
A moment, please. I think the way I intend to do this will expedite it. I have a paper copy somewhere. This has been previously provided to the prosecution. It's 1160. I think it was provided to someone. At any rate, may I approach?
Yes.
I do not.
Okay, did you say 1160? Is this an exhibit? Is this an exhibit? I don't understand, because that's not what you have on your list, so that's fine.
I don't necessarily need to admit it.
If you've mentioned it, it's ours, so I just need to keep track of it. Okay.
So rather than reading in all of these GPS locations, I've cut and pasted what you wrote in your report onto this document. If you'd compare them so that we can have a record of the precise spots where your dog alerted. On middle map, pardon me. Those are all right?
Yes.
No objection, Judge.
We can admit this?
Yes, if the witness has checked that the GPS are the same as her report, I have no objection.
You're all right with that, Mr. Moran? Yep. All right. Yes.
Are you aware of whether any, or did it happen while you were there? Any excavation, any digging, anything at the locations your dog alerted?
I don't recall any of those things being done while we were working.
All right, I want to fast forward now. So we've been talking about August 2013. If we could, I'd like to jump to February of 2014. So that would be one year, 2 months, 25 days later. Do you agree?
From,
When you would last, or I'm sorry, from when Dylan went missing.
yes,
And that was to come do a truck sniff, right? You brought the dog out to sniff the dogs. Right?
correct.
If I could put those images up, that would be helpful. 472. One of the things that was occurring to me is that Diddy's too small to be alerting as high up on that truck as the blue square does. Isn't that fair?
That is correct.
And you wrote in your report that Diddy was inserted into the truck. Do you recall writing that?
I lifted her into the back, but I don't recall if I helped her into the front driver's seat when we went inside of it.
You would agree with me that inserted suggests she was picked up, put in the truck, right?
It could mean that, yes.
Because if the dog just jumps into the truck, you'd write dog jumped into the truck, right?
Sure.
And this sounds right. Molly was then inserted into the vehicle beginning at the driver's front door. That's what you wrote.
That would have been my description of allowing her into the vehicle. I can't recall if she jumped in or I assisted her.
On that day in February of 2014, CBI crime scene analyst Kevin Torres was there, right?
I recall somebody giving me their business card from there. Yes.
And there was another briefing on that day, right?
I'm assuming so. I don't remember any details about it.
But after the briefing with the Potter County Sheriff's Office personnel and CBI, you went back to Area 51 with the dog, where the truck was, right?
Yes.
You've done car lineups before, right? Like in the Caleb Bird case.
I wouldn't call it a lineup. I would say there was a bunch of cars in an area.
Okay.
But sure, it can be a lineup.
I'm going to refer to it as a lineup unless that's confusing.
Nope.
With a lineup, there are several cars and only one of them is the target vehicle, correct?
Is this in training or real world?
Both. It's the same in both, right? You have several cars. One is the one of interest, right? That's what I'm talking about.
Well, I think we don't know if there's anything to be found.
Understood. That would be the training scenario. And potentially real world.
Yes. Sometimes
So, scenarios, training or real world, someone there knows whether there's a target car or not.
yes.
And lay people are familiar with this concept from the usual suspect lineup. You have a bunch of folks who set up ice measures and the suspects in there amongst other people, right?
Yes.
And that's the similar idea, analogous situation with the car lineup, right?
Yes.
That wasn't done here. There's only one car. You knew which one was of interest.
Correct.
Sometimes when your dog's really interested in a smell, when you're going around cars, she might jump inside because the smell is really strong, right?
They can try to jump inside if the doors are open.
But you aren't sure with respect to the inner vehicle whether insert means picked her up and put her in there, but you definitely picked her up and lifted her into the bed of the truck.
I definitely did, yes.
And the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's analyst was there. Did he confirm or corroborate any of these alerts while you were on?
No,
Did you observe him applying luminol and phenolphthalein?
I don't recall watching any of that type of thing.
But he didn't make any corroboration of what he identified.
I have no knowledge of what may or may not have been found in the vehicle.
Before you left again for Wisconsin, they didn't say, hey, your dog was right, we corroborated.
No.
And with this truck, there was no top. This entire situation was stopped, right?
Yes.
And when you were at the house, you would agree the garage was cluttered. The vehicle was kept outside, right?
There were two different vehicles. So there was a Chevy outside the house. And I don't know if this was on the property or not.
Did you observe any vehicles that were garaged, that kept in the garage?
I just remember the garage being full, but I don't recall if there was a vehicle in there.
Do you have any information to suggest to you that between November 19th, 2012, and your sniff of the truck on February 10th, 2014, this vehicle had been kept inside?
Sections, just calling for speculation, Judge.
I'm not sure if you have any information.
She's asking if she had any information. I think it's okay.
I don't know.
Did it look like the kind of vehicle that had been kept inside?
So again, she just answered the question that she
Yeah,
doesn't know.
That I'm not gonna let you do.
Did you inquire how many miles had been put on this truck between November 2012, 1 year, 2 months, 25 days later?
No.
After the dog was picked up, lifted into the truck bed, she indicated, right?
Yeah.
Question asked and answered multiple times.
Is there a better, I'll withdraw it. Is there a better example of cueing a dog than picking it up and putting it in the spot that you wanted to alert?
I wouldn't call that queuing, it's just clearing area.
There were 3 bags that were removed from the truck on that day. 1 year, 2 months, 25 days after Dylan's disappearance, right?
There were 3 bags in the truck and they were pulled out, yeah.
Dog alerted on all 3 bags February 13th, 2014, right?
Initially, when they were removed and placed outside, immediately from coming out of the vehicle, she indicated on all 3.
Next day, dog only alerted on 2 of the bags, right?
I asked them and explained, I don't know if it's the bags or if it's the inside of the truck. So how about we let it sit for 24 hours? And she did indicate on 2, but not a 3rd.
Well, if it was something emanating from the truck, it would have gotten on all 3 because all 3 were in the truck, right?
Correct.
Your Honor, at this point, I'm going to object based on defense's motion earlier not to talk about this particular suitcase and the court's ruling. I think it's misleading to start talking about it.
Mr. Moran?
I can withdraw that or I'll clear it up because this dog doesn't alert to hair.
You know, and you can't testify when you're, don't do that, all right? You can't just throw things out to the jury just in response.
So since would it be better if we approach so that's not going on?
Yeah, why don't you?
Thank you.
All right.
We're rounding the bend. We're almost there. Thank you for your patience and kind attention. Do you recall telling Judge Wilson, and I suspect you testified to this before, that hair is an inappropriate training use?
A strand of hair would be inappropriate use, yes.
Because hair, as we discussed, is ubiquitous, it's everywhere. Right?
Can you try and stay with the microphone when you're talking softly? Or speak up.
Yes.
So if you have a dog that's reliably trained to hair, then you would end up with a dog alerting all over the place because hair is everywhere, right?
Strand of hair could be everywhere, yes.
I see that you're saying strand of hair because you have trained your dog on hair, right?
Clumps of hair, yes.
So clumps of hair has gone into the dog's database, so to speak.
Yes.
And you can't say, because dogs can't communicate back with us in English, that a dog is differentiating between a bunch of hairs and a couple of hairs.
A dog cannot speak, that's correct.
So if that smell's in the database, then there's every reason to suspect that in the field, the dog may be alerting to that smell because the dog has been trained to that smell.
That is always possible, yes.
I want to make sure that this is clear, and I'm getting this from the Canine Search Solutions webpage, but you agree that, quote, the dog is trained to provide a clear and controlled indication at the source of the odor upon detection. That's,
When they're able to get to source, yes.
and that's pinpointing, right?
Yes.
Would you disagree with me that when you're searching with this case, that your dog alerted at least 43 separate occasions for a final train response?
I'm assuming you tallied it, so yes,
I may have missed one or two, but you would agree.
approximately
that there are-
40.
Yeah. that
Yes.
there are. And there was nothing, well, if I could put up that. Permission to publish this, I showed it to council, I don't think they object. With the slide demo that shows a picture of the living room as it existed in August
Is
2014.
this an exhibit the jury's gonna get to see? Have? Because if it's not, I don't know that we can do that.
I don't object, Judge. If it's easiest to move this along, I'll just stipulate now that defense can admit that exhibit. It shows the living room at the time, basically next to the diagram. I think it's
And that's fine, just put an exhibit sticker on it, give it to us, and you can show it.
That's the exhibit he's talking about.
We'll do.
Okay, what number would that be then? Is it preferably not a number you've already assigned?
I'm gonna have to rely on someone smarter than I am for that. Permission to approach.
Yeah, I want to mark first, okay? Because I want a clear record on this. So can you just, we've got stickers up here you can use.
This has not been printed in color. I can print it in black and white and have it to the color at the next break. Or have a color copy by midday.
And that's fine. Oh, all right, that's fine. So what is the number going to be? Should I throw out one that I don't have anything under? Because I don't know what
That's
else you
great,
have.
please.
Well,
Let's do
that
that.
doesn't mean you don't already have it written down somewhere, because you're adding things to me all the time. How about 1184?
I think that works, and we'll make adjustments if not.
All right.
I'm actually being told no, it's down.
Well, I don't have that yet. Okay.
1222, please.
1222? All right. So you can show it then. 1222 is admitted.
So Judge, I would ask that we just make a record as to what this is so that it's clear for the jury later. My understanding is that's an FBI search warrant photo from August of 2013 on the left, and then the People's Previous exhibit on the right that's been admitted, that diagrams, the living room.
Is that correct?
that's People's Exhibit 340 on the right.
So People's 340 has a different configuration than because of the two dates. I just want to make sure that we're making a clear record on what this exhibit is.
That's accurate. So on the right is the house as it existed on November 29th, 2012. I'm showing this, I just want to compare the furniture. This courtroom returned August 5th.
All right.
And I know that you weren't remembering that it's been so long now. But
In this courtroom, can you see if he stands there? Okay, you let him know if you can.
this area here, the area where the dog alerted in August 2015.
In that corner.
And then the dog alerted here in August 2015, right?
On the right side of a brown leather couch.
And that's the only location that the dog is alerting on that day in the living room.
Besides the doorway, is that out of, not considered living room?
Yes, please.
Those are the only two.
But the door is approximately here. If this picture is extended out, the dog did alert there.
Yes,
But otherwise, in this room, it's only those two locations, right?
correct.
So if we follow this arrow, that couch is actually underneath the couch. But the dog is not on the smaller couch.
Not that I recall.
Okay. And then this location here, which appears approximately here, is not an alert by your dog, right?
I did not, I got an indication in that corner area, so,
When we're talking about the center of the room, that's not your dog. The dog did not alert there,
So
correct?
Judge, the record needs to be more clear on that, because Mr. Moran's not pointing at the center of the room. He's pointing in the general, not in the far corner, but he's pointing basically to the floor in the northeast portion of the living room.
Well, let's follow this arrow here. Would you agree with me? So I'm indicating from CBI number 3, slide on the right, to 40, which is pointing to the 3 about right there. Right there. On ours, 12, 23.
those pictures are difficult to follow. How about if I clarify where she indicated in that space?
Well, the exhibited in the diagram
Yes.
indicates this area here.
It was in that corner
Let me
area.
move on to this one.
Let her finish her answer, please.
CBI number 5.
Let her finish her answer, please. Did you have more to say?
No, I'm good.
All right.
CBI number 5 points to approximately this area here. Would you agree?
Yes,
And there's no alert there, right?
not that I documented, no.
You can just, as much as you're moving around, you can just take it with you, Mr. Moran.
So Mike,
We'll get a sound man in here for next time, huh?
and then if I may, permission to publish 470 next to the People's Exhibit 470 next to People's Exhibit 340.
All right.
Permission to approach again.
Yes.
So Judge, this has been asked and answered multiple times. think Mr. Moran's made the point that the furniture is different. There's actually another witness who's going to talk directly on that too.
All right, and that's fine, but I don't know what he's gonna ask any, at this point.
Just point of clarification, when Molly alerted on August the 5th, 2013, it was the general floor area of the northeast corner, correct?
Yes,
And so it was down low, approximately here.
So do you want the jury to see what you're pointing at?
I do.
Then do point again.
Right here, down low, there?
yes.
At long last, I think that's it. Thank you. I have no further questions now.
Okay, redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Ms. Gumman, I'm going to try to be directed to topics so I can move quickly through things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you're asked by defense counsel about several things about what's possible in terms of alerts and examples of like a single hair or blood. You remember all that?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you agree with me there's what's possible and then there's what you've seen in your training and experience?
Yes.
So can you explain to the jury if you took specific measures in all the training you did with Molly over the years to keep her from doing alerts on things like a single hair of blood or a drop of blood?
When I had been working Canine Cleo, I found that she could find very small amounts of remains, but I felt that it was not beneficial to assisting law enforcement in locating a possible place where a body had been at. So early on, I tried to adjust my training with Biddy, Canine Molly, and I did train with hair. However, I made it a large clump of hair, and it was stored with my other decomposing human remains, because I didn't want to bog down the program or the investigation with the dog hitting on every strand of hair. And that hair was utilized in training twofold. Because it was saturated with decomp odor, always being stored there, the real reason is for the field. Sometimes when we're searching for scattered human remains, the first thing the dog may come upon is sloughed off, and apologize for being graphic, a sloughed off piece of scalp and hair, which would then assist in the recovery of the rest of the remains, because now potentially that was the area to focus a search for more missing human remains.
Okay, let me stop you there. So the suggestion that you're training on just hair itself is somewhat inaccurate. Am I right?
Objection, that's leading and not true.
Hold on. I think it's a fair question based upon your cross-examination. I'm gonna allow him to do it.
But just clarify that for the jury, please.
I definitely believe that these dogs could indicate on a strand of hair. I purposely tried to not fine-tune her that much. We wouldn't be discussing the idea that what good does the dog do to go into every house and find a strand of hair. So I would use larger clumps, and I would always store it with my other remains in an effort to avoid this concern.
So it wasn't just hair alone?
It was hair alone, however,
I'm sorry. Bad question. You just explained it, but if you were going to use hair alone, you're saturating it in that odor first.
Correct.
And then other times, did you use other items in conjunction with hair?
Yes.
Similar with small amounts of blood, did you take precautions with that as well in training Molly specifically?
Blood is a sticky subject. So in my early days with her in 2008, we were still, as a community of human remains detection dogs, trying to do more than we probably needed to do. So I had started out doing a little bit of small blood. However, I backed off of it, and again, knowing that houses have small amounts of blood from a shaving incident, I didn't want to bog down an investigation. As neat as it is that the dog could find a drop of blood, it wasn't hopeful for this type of situation.
And that makes sense, but let me direct you to what did you do as a reaction to that to train differently?
So I would purposely place small amounts of blood in training and have a larger source of human remains in the area. And as weird as this sounds, I was hoping she would miss or not indicate on the blood and only hit on the decomposition so that we don't have to struggle with what does this all mean.
And that's the expectation going to the larger source in this type of work?
I tried to dial it up so the dog is finding larger sources of human remains. And as weird as it sounds, I want her to not tell me about really, really small spots of blood.
So let's talk about in the practical world, in your experience. And let's just start with, generally, you talked about some houses that there were no indications at all, right?
That's correct.
In those houses, would common sense suggest that there were probably hairs around in the house?
Objection, this is leading and was covered at length in direct.
Overruled. Go ahead.
Would common sense dictate that in some of these houses with no trained final responses, there were probably hairs in the house, for example?
Yes.
And then using this case as a case example, I think you had testified that there were rooms in the house that there were no indications in at all.
Correct.
Was one of those a bedroom?
Yes.
And was one of those a bathroom?
Yes.
Okay. In your experience, does Molly hit on every washer machine in every house you've searched?
No.
Are there many that she's not done the trained final response on?
She, on only one other field search did she indicate on a washing machine.
And similarly, in the backs of beds of trucks, I'd imagine she's been in those before.
Yes.
And you've probably, because of her size, put her in those truck beds before.
Yes.
Has she also been inside of truck beds where she didn't have trained final response?
Yes.
Okay. There was some discussion about things that could have tracked in odor by defense counsel, sort of a speculation about whether it could be on boots or whether it could be on Molly herself. You remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
Section form of the question.
There's no question there yet, other than do you remember it? Just fine.
So
These speculations are
There's no question yet. She's setting up a question, okay? So you can object when there's a real question with some context. Go ahead.
thank you, Your Honor. So, Ms. Gumman, in this case, if someone had, let's assume they had something on their boots or Molly had it on her paws, and they tracked throughout the entirety of the house, is that consistent with the type of indications, or was Molly more specific than that in this case?
I don't believe somebody walking around with contaminated shoes was causing the specific area of indication she gave.
Okay. And just to point out a couple of those areas, one was on a couch cushion, right?
Yes.
And another one was in the corner of the floor in the northeast portion of the living room.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And there were various other areas where people would probably walk and Molly had ran that were not indicated on.
Correct.
I need to touch base on this vegetational methane. Okay, I just want you to explain it to the jury. Is this the same odor as human decomp, or can dogs distinguish it?
When a new, fresh, green human remains detection dog is learning the database of human remains odor, one of the things that you want to do is work that dog on occasion in areas where there's swamps and methane, vegetational methane. A young dog can inadvertently indicate or provide a trained final response for a variety of reasons, because sometimes dogs will generalize. So a young green dog could make that mistake. It's okay, because then you know as a handler and a trainer what you need to work on to train the dog that, nope, that's not something that's in your database. And as time goes on, you inadvertently expose that dog continually to swampy conditions where we're just searching and not getting anything. So the dog will be able to clarify that vegetational methane, although it's similar, is different than human remains. One of the VOCs, volatile organic compounds of human remains, is methane.
Thank you. So it's not the same exact compound overall.
Asked and answered, leading.
It was asked and answered.
Okay. So there was reference by defense counsel to RPAD BOS and the 378 part compound. Do you remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
Did RPAD BOS, he's got published literature, right?
Yes.
And you've read some of it?
Yes.
RPAD BOS, did he try to develop an instrument that could capture that exact odor of death or human remains compound? Tell the jury, has he ever been, is that called the Labrador? Is that what he called it?
I've read different versions of it.
He has evolving instruments that he tries to create.
Yes.
Has he ever been able to create one as sensitive as a dog's nose?
To date, I don't believe so.
And he would acknowledge as much, am I right?
Yes.
Does he use his own instruments for both human remains detection and residual odor?
It's the same thing, so yes.
Okay, thank you. We talked about lineups for vehicles. You recall that?
Yes.
And the Dodge was not done in any kind of vehicle lineup.
Correct.
Was the Chevy done in any kind of vehicle lineup?
No.
Any trained final response on the Chevy?
No.
And then there was an instance in this case, actually, where there was something at least somewhat similar to a lineup in the impound lot, right?
Yes.
And in that setting, Molly picked 2 cars.
Yes.
Out of many.
Yes.
A couple other quick topics that defense touched on. There was mention about certification for residual odor. Is there any such process?
Not that I'm aware of at this time.
Okay. Is there any such distinction by any of these national agencies or national guidelines, such as Swig Dog? Do any of them distinguish a separate certification process for the odor of human remains on remains or the odor left behind by those remains?
Not that I'm aware of.
So when your certification is for human remains detection, does that include the very same odor, be it off the remains directly or left behind by the remains?
Section, this has been asked and answered.
Hold on a second. Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious from the testimony. I agree.
Okay. So your certification, because there's only one type of certification for human remains detection, that would include remains or residual odor.
Same objection.
So Judge, this,
Overruled.
thank you.
Does it include, during certification, there's always source at the
Right.
testing area?
Right. The odor itself, there's only one type of certification, and it's for human remains odor. Am I right about that?
Correct.
Would that include odor, be it from,
Section, I think it's the way the question's asked creates a 403 problem. This is misleading. There's always source present is the testimony.
that is the testimony, Judge. I'm following up on the certification process.
I don't see anything wrong with this line of questioning yet, so you're overruled it right now. Go ahead.
So all of these national agencies and guidelines, they've decided not to create an independent certification process for residual odor, right?
This time, no.
Because it's the same odor, isn't it?
Section leading and 403.
That, I think we hit that and did that. Let's move on.
Okay. So when your dog gets a certification for human remains detection, does that include the work that you did in this case?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, thank you. There's a suggestion about the idea, you asked questions about another handler taking your certified dog and working her, and you responded that you've never done that in your entire career.
No.
Why not?
It's just a industry standard that when a dog team is being certified, it's not the dog or the handler, it's the team.
Thank you.
So someone else can't, even though my current dog would work for anyone in this room, it would not be considered certified because her and I take a certification.
So when you say industry standard, what you mean is everybody in the dog handling field knows that.
Yes.
I want to talk about the location of law enforcement officers at the time of your search. Do you recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
And I think what you said, and counsel actually, I think, confirmed this, was that you don't pay attention to where they are in the room.
I really don't.
Would it be better if I asked them directly? Would that be more helpful?
Yes.
And then I want to talk about the chart, with the reliability on it. So you referenced back to testimony in June of 2019. You recall that?
Yes.
In that testimony, did you clearly explain on the record that the bold were certification tests, but that she had failed her first test?
Oh, yes.
And then you explained that here in testimony to the jury as well, right?
Yes.
And then in that next exhibit that's introduced and given to the jury, Exhibit 168, is that also all that information within that exhibit and given to the jury in this case?
All of her certifications and outcomes are provided.
Okay. So the raw data is right there for them.
Yes.
And then you had indicated the bold was different. Is the bold the testing that was done in a blind setting by someone other than you for a certification process?
Yes.
So in that sense, does it give the jury guidance as to where those types of tests are on the chart?
If they want to cross-reference the bold with the dates or the paperwork that was provided during each certification, that would be how they would do that.
And then they would know it was a certifying agency doing the testing in that example.
Yes.
Now, in conjunction with this case, didn't you also provide hundreds of pages of the actual training records that you did?
Yes.
And those went through discovery like everything else to me, to defense counsel, et cetera.
Yeah.
So defense counsel pointed out a correction on your chart in regard to a miss that was actually documented in the other exhibit you provided in 168, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And save for that one correction, there's been no other reference in this testimony to all the other hundreds of training records, right?
Can you re-ask that part?
Yeah. So that was the one area in the chart where perhaps there's a correction out of all those hundreds of records that they've seen.
Yes.
And then in regard to that itself, what that would put us up to with that correction is 2 false alerts, right?
Yes.
And then you also have in 168 all of the other certifications where she was successful.
Yes.
That was in 2008, 2009, 2010. It was basically annually through 2015.
Yes.
And they can look and see if there were any misses in there as well if they want in
Yes.
the deliberations.
Yes.
But there weren't.
Objection, leading, cumulative, ask and answer.
This part wasn't asked and answered, and it's fair. I mean, this is a lot for the jury to get through if they just look at the exhibits. Like, I'm giving you guys more leeway than I normally would on something like this. I think it's fine. So you can ask the question again so she can remember what it was.
In the other certifications, Molly didn't have false alerts and she passed the certification process, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when we talk about all those certifications, do you recall how many she's had over the years, the certifications, including the missed one? And you can reference the exhibit if it's helpful.
Objection, it's irrelevant with respect to anything after 2012.
Oh, I think it's relevant, Ms. Marin.
So you would like me to,
Just how many certification processes she went through, tests.
For sure 8.
Okay.
I don't recall if I had done a certification in 2016 because we were winding down her career.
So let's be conservative and say the 8 that are on your exhibit.
Oh, that we passed or took?
No, took.
Oh,
Okay.
Took 8, passed 7.
So she failed the first one and passed the next 7.
Yeah.
And total, over those 8 times she was tested by someone other than you in blind testing, there were 2 times that she had false positives, both back in 2008.
Asking answered, cumulative.
Let's move on.
Sure. So let me talk about the searches themselves. So when we talk about the clothing, there were a total of 5 trained final responses by Molly.
Throughout the clothing,
Yeah.
throughout the clothing sniff,
Yes.
5. Yes,
And throughout the truck sniff, there were at least, I think, 5 different trained final responses. Is that about right?
Not sure how to
Objection
answer.
to leading, suggesting the answer.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to move quickly. I'll ask the question differently, Judge.
All right.
How many trained final responses did you record during the processing of the Dodge truck?
Including the objects in there.
Yeah.
8.
Okay. And with the processing, with the search of the house, both inside and outside, about how many trained final responses did Molly have?
Let's see. About 16.
So in each of those searches that you did, Molly had far more than 2 trained final responses, correct?
Yes.
And in the entirety of her testing history for certifications in a blind setting, she had only 2 false positives.
Correct.
So she would have been having a really bad day for any.
That's argumentative.
Okay.
And I'll object to the one previous about it leading.
Well, you know what? It's in. It's a little late to object to something that's already happened.
Has she ever in a training setting had this kind of documented number of mistakes for there not to have been human remains in any of these locations?
No.
Thank you. I want to clarify one other thing too. You were asked about page 1383 of Discovery. And that's a description of Molly's training history, right? Is that what that document was?
Can I see it?
Yes. Yeah, Coach.
You may.
So I'm going to direct your attention to what council was directing your attention.
What page are you looking at?
1383 from page 2 of reference.
I referenced 1322.
The couple council you were talking about.
The K9 search solution certification. Yeah, I thought it was exhibit H, but maybe the top of the A. 1322. Okay.
Start with Molly.
All right, go ahead.
So you were asked about the Cadaver Proficiency certification, but you were also asked about national certification, right?
Objection, I was asking about the K9 search solution certification.
I believe that's correct.
And are you looking, you see where I'm drawing your attention to on my back?
Yes.
So I just want you to clarify.
Get to the microphone.
I just want you to clarify for the jury, are these 2 separate tests, the national certification and the proficiency certification?
Yes.
Did she do both in September of 2008?
Yes.
So it's accurate that she was actually certified by a national organization in addition to that process you'd explained?
Yes.
Thank you. the last thing that I wanted to, well, let me ask you this. There was reference to the creek, right?
Yes.
In the field, why is it in the field? Are there a lot of unknowns sometimes in the cases? Can you just talk about that?
Can you be more specific?
Yeah, so if your canine's out in the field in an unknown area and has a trained final response, do you make assumptions as to whether that's a area that there's necessarily something or not?
If the dog on a search provides a trained final response, we document it and try to determine to the best of our ability, is it airborne, is it source, and then also, is there any other anomalies that could be causing the indication?
That's what I'm getting at. So what's an anomaly?
My verbiage of an anomaly is as a result of years in the field, there is the odor of human remains much more prevalent or available to human remains detection dogs than you would be aware of. For example, old cemetery, and not a new one, but an old one. They're in pine boxes, they're skeletal remains, they're next to a river. If you're close to that cemetery but down current, the best way I can describe it is that odor seeps into the soil and drains into the waterway. The dog gives an indication or a trained final response. And we need to know that so we keep moving if we're clearing for a missing person. Other anomalies would, and I've had all of this happen to me multiple times.
Let me be specific. Have you had anomalies in running water?
Yes.
Where you found out later that there was some kind of human remains that got into it that you didn't know at the time?
Yes.
Can you just give the jury an example of that?
One case, individual had committed suicide up into a cornfield, and the dog was indicating downhill at the waterway. And we processed the waterway, thinking that was where the source was coming from. And then the body was discovered uphill, and with the flow of water, it was pooling in the waterway.
In this case, are you aware that only a few of Dylan Redwine's bones are actually located?
I currently don't have a knowledge of what's been recovered.
Are you aware that there are several parts of his that were not recovered?
The answer
He doesn't know.
So let me, the last thing I want to do is ask you about a few scenarios that were broached by defense counsel's questions. You had been asked if you knew many facts about the case, and I think what you said was, even to this day, you don't really know a lot about the background facts in the case.
I don't know.
I'll be more specific. I think what counsel had asked you was, do you know now if your dog was corroborated or successful at various locations? And I think what your testimony on that line of questions was, you don't know exactly where anything was found.
So
Correct.
That's not really a question that you testified, right?
Is that true that still now you don't know exactly where evidence was or wasn't found in the case?
I don't know and won't know till after everything is completed.
Okay. So with regard to the truck, I think the prosecution's already called two witnesses that said there's no blood in there, and defense referenced the third. So let's work with a scenario that assumes there's no blood in the truck. Under that scenario, if someone had a body in the truck but no blood, would that still be a situation where the odor of human remains could be there?
Yes.
And if someone had body parts in there but no blood, would that still be a situation where there could be the odor of human remains in there?
Yes.
With regard to the house, I know you don't know this, but let's assume it for the problem that there's been a prosecution witness that testified there was some blood located, but not even visible to the naked eye because it had been cleaned up in that person's opinion. Let's work in that scenario. If that were the case and there was amounts of blood that couldn't any longer be seen by the naked eye, and then in a different location in that same room, there had been a body for a period of time, what would Molly do?
In my experience in the field with her, I have had an occasion where she indicated in an area, providing a trained final response, that she detected the odor of human remains. And I was later told the body was in that location, but they also said she had missed small amounts of blood in a different location.
And you talked about her specific,
Objection, move to strike. That required heavy hearsay.
The purpose of this, though, is to show her accuracy in what she can and will discern, and what she won't discern. So I don't think it's hearsay, because it's being offered for a different purpose.
The
Go ahead.
truth of the matter, if I may.
also
I
seven,
understand the hearsay rule, Mr. Moran, and you don't have to argue with me after I've made a ruling. And if you keep doing it, I'm gonna get more upset than I am right now. So please go ahead. Go ahead.
thank you, Judge. So you've talked about the training to create this type of trained final response on the larger source, right?
Yes.
And then you've also had experience with Molly in that type of setting.
Yes,
So if there had been a body in a room for a period of time and then minor amounts of blood still there, it might make sense that Molly would indicate on that area.
yes.
I want to talk about 470. Can I put up 470? Judge, I have less than 5 minutes, just so you know.
Okay.
Yeah, approach this.
You may. What's it saying?
So there was discussion about the layout of the living room at 2 different dates. You remember that?
Yes,
November 29th of 2012 when the search warrant was done, and then August 14th, which is close in time to when you were in the room, right?
yes,
And you testified the first 2 responses documented in your report were that it was the northeast corner floor area of the room,
yes,
and then the cushion of the sofa on the right side if you were facing it.
yes.
Now, if this sofa, back at the time that Dylan went missing, was actually located right here, would Molly be consistent in the 2 areas that she's indicating a trained final response to the odor of human remains?
To me, that is indicative of a large source of human remains odor. So yes,
And to use our blood and body example, if a body had for some period of time been on that couch in this corner, you might get a trained final response like that from Molly.
yes,
At the time you did the search, did you know the couch used to be in that corner?
no, no.
My final question for you is, given all the discussion and testimony, whether or not biological matter or blood is found at a particular location throughout the case, does that impact your expert opinion as to whether Molly was doing a trained final response for the odor of human remains? Is that a bad question? Okay. Let me ask a better question. You're unaware of what locations there was blood, what locations there weren't, right?
Yeah.
Assuming some locations had blood and some didn't, does that have any impact on your independent expert opinion as to Molly's findings?
I'm not surprised or concerned, that's not the right word. What they found is different tool than the dog's nose. So I'm always accepting of whatever's found.
But regardless of what they found, is it still your expert opinion that the odor itself, that Molly's finding that based on her trained final responses?
Based on the totality of everything, I would say that based on my training experience with her, that there was a large source of human remains besides a little bit of blood.
Thank you.
In the living, or in the house.
Right, and overall, her trained final responses, do you believe that they are based on the odor of human remains regardless of what other evidence there was in the case? Does that question make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Asked and answered.
It has not been answered, Judge.
It was the question before the last one and the question before that.
All right, this is your last question.
Yes, it is.
Go ahead and answer the question.
She talked about them being different disciplines, right? My only question for you, let me be as direct as possible. Regardless of what else was found in the case, your expert opinion that Molly's trained final responses in this case were for the odor of human remains?
Yes.
Thank you.
Questions from the jury? All right, question from the jury. So I'm going to ask it, but I want you to face the jury when you answer it. Actually, there's a couple questions here. Has Molly ever had a false alert since her certification on September 20th of 2008, including while she was on duty?
A false alert in the field or in training?
Well, the question is, let's start with training.
In my opinion, she has given indications where she can't get to source. Well, I think that the term false alert is a little misleading. The definition of a false alert, it's kind of a stickler point for me. If I know that there's source of human remains in an area and the wind's blowing and there's a tree and the dog first comes into odor and indicates at the tree, and let's say the dog is 6 feet away and gives her trained final response. Some folks call that a false. I disagree, and American Academy of Forensic Science defines the false alert is when the absence of odor and a dog gives its trained final response. To me, that is a pinpointing issue, so it's not false.
So with that understanding, in training
Has she provided a false alert in training
or certification, I assume, since
2008?
Since 2008.
Not that I can recall.
Okay. So do you see the reliability chart being as accurate as possible, which would show 0 false alerts since she has been certified and a 92.6% of reliability? I'm not sure exactly how that math is calculated.
I believe that the reliability was 90.
I think, well,
It's less than that.
I think I'm assuming that their math is based after something else.
Okay.
So I think that's what's going on. I think that maybe the difference may not. I don't know. So
Okay.
just ignore the number. But
Sure. Should I talk about reliability in general?
well, from your perspective, your numbers that you've shown on that reliability chart are accurate, with the exception of what you testified to. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna let the jury, if they want to do the math, do their own math. Okay, however they want to figure it out.
Okay.
So, any follow-up from either side?
No, Your Honor.
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
The reason you don't include what happens in the field on a reliability chart is because the dog is alerting on occasion where nothing is found, right?
Yes.
So there are occasions that don't make it in reports because there's no need to include this, where the dog's done a final trained response and nothing's ever found, so you don't know whether the dog was alerting to an ancient burial ground running downstream or if the dog is doing a false alert, right?
And you're talking about,
That's why it's not included in reliability charts, what happens in the field, because there's so many unknowns.
control.
So there have been occasions where your dog did a final trained response out in the field and there was nothing ever identified associated with that final trained response, right?
Has Molly, in her years in the field, provided trained final responses, and we never clarified one way or the other if it was right or wrong?
Yes, ma'am.
I believe so.
Yeah. And in this case, where out of my count, 43 separate different final trained responses, nothing was ever found to corroborate those final trained responses, you can't tell this jury whether or not that was 43 failed final trained responses. 43
Objection
just false
beyond the
alerts.
scope, argumentative, incorrect, and not within this witness's knowledge basis.
I think you can ask it as a hypothetical if you want to.
With 43 uncorroborated final trained responses.
That's not how you ask a hypothetical.
Hypothetically, with 43,
Hypothetically, if you found 43 trained final responses, and
none of those were corroborated, you can't say for certain whether those were 43 false alerts, correct?
They were not corroborated by another tool.
Yes, ma'am.
I can't say one way or the other.
And corroboration would include the dog alerted and there was a bone, right?
yeah,
So it's argumentative.
I think you've made your point, Mr. Moran.
And can I ask a quick clarifying question or two on that topic, on those
Well, I
topics?
don't know. He may have some more based on the question. Anything else on that question or not? And I'm going to give you a time limit here, Mr. Moran.
Yeah, pardon me. I think that's clear, and they should understand that. That's why we.
No, you're not allowed to do that, Mr. Moran. We've talked about that, okay?
But, okay. The prosecution indicated they had no further questions, so
That's not what well, they get to respond to what you did.
they have recrossed.
No. This is their witness. Go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. So Mr. Moran's talking about unknowns in the field, et cetera, right? Is that exactly why you keep training records like you do, hundreds of pages that I'm able to provide to the defense counsel to look at?
That's beyond the scope. That's
No,
about.
it's not. It's not beyond the scope. It goes specifically as to this whole problem.
Okay.
Is this a simple, I really want to move on, but I just want to ask you, the reason you do so much training in training records is so you have controlled situations in which we can check the accuracy of the dog, right?
Yeah.
And that includes multiple certification processes that involve another individual checking to make sure your dog is accurate so that when you put your dog in the field, you can trust that accuracy.
Yeah.
And in all the...
You're done.
Okay.
All right.
One last question.
Well, what is it?
Well, in all the materials that you provided to defense showing the accuracy of your dog with regard to false alerts, there's nowhere near 43 anywhere in there, is there?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Cummins, thank you very much. She's excused. Can she be released?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Moran.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we will take our recess. I'm sure Aaron's fingers are having problems. Let's start up again. I want to take a little longer recess. There's some stuff I need to get done, and I'm sorry about that. 20. Oh, everybody rise for the jury, please. All right, we'll be in recess.
We have to change, we have to, there's just a little bit of the two shots.
Which one do you guys have, Tom? I have two, physical swabs if you wanna look at them, John. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so bring him in. Remain standing for the jury, please. Come on in. All right, good to be seated. Prosecution's next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. People call Investigator Tom Cowing.
All right. Just because it's been so long, I'm going to swear you in again. Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes, sir. Thank you.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please start by stating your full name and introducing yourself to the jury?
Yes. My name is Tom Cowing, last name spelling C-O-W-I-N-G.
And where are you employed, sir?
The Polk County Sheriff's Office,
How long have you been employed there?
23 years.
What is your current assignment there?
I am a patrol lieutenant,
What does it mean to be a lieutenant?
just supervisor over our 6 sergeants who supervise 30 other deputies.
And back in, I know the jury's already met you from the measurements testimony, so I'll move a little more quickly. But back in November of 2012, what was your assignment then?
Sergeant investigator.
And is investigator kind of like a detective?
Yes,
Were you involved in the Redwine case back then?
yes.
And when did you get involved in that case, roughly speaking?
11/20/2012.
And then did you become, as the case went on, one of the investigators assigned to it?
Yes,
And as part of that, did you collect items of evidence throughout the case?
I did.
So I'm going to direct you to specific topics and move through them. Were you present at a search warrant on November 29th of 2012
Yes,
at the defendant's residence?
yes,
Did you collect some items there from Joe Clayton?
yes,
And were those swabs?
yes,
And did you also collect the Nerf football from Peggy Russin?
yes.
Did you log those evidence into property and evidence pursuant to procedures with investigator Kevin Brown?
Yes,
And then on November 30th of 2012, were you assigned to execute a court order to obtain control samples of DNA?
I did.
And who were you going to collect that from?
Mr. Redwine
Was there another investigator with you?
and Patterson.
And how did you arrange to make that evidence collection?
We were able to speak with Mr. Redwine over the phone and agreed to meet at the Bayfield Marshal's office.
Did he come with someone else?
His brother, David Stone.
Was David Stone his brother? Was he staying with him at the time?
Yes,
Given that he was staying at the home, did you collect swabs from him as well?
I did.
So with regard to the collection of buccal swabs, can you explain to the jury what that is and how you do it?
So buccal swabs are Q-tip applicators, excuse me, with log wood handles. They come in a paper packet, usually 2 per packet, with gloved hands. Remove the swabs. Ask the person you're swabbing to open their mouth wide and circular motions around the cheek, gum area. Put the Q-tips back in the original package, down inside the package, and then put that package inside of a paper evidence bag and let it dry overnight.
And then you seal it up after that?
Yes,
Then do you log those into property and evidence?
correct.
And are those later sent off to Colorado Bureau of Investigation for testing in the case?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I'd ask to approach the People's Exhibits 138 and 139, please.
You may.
Investigator Cowing, have you seen People's Exhibits 138 and 139 before?
Yes,
Are those the swabs that you collected in this case?
they are.
And is one of those exhibits for David Stone and one of those exhibits for Mark Redwine?
Yes,
Do you recognize the packaging?
I do.
And is your name on it?
Yes,
Judge, at this time I move to admit People's Exhibits 138 and 139 into evidence.
Mr. Moran? Okay. They're admitted.
Now, Investigator Cowing, did you stay assigned to the case after that as well for further assignment?
yes,
Were you aware of plans to search Middle Mountain Road in the case?
yes.
And when was that scheduled for the bigger search?
That was scheduled for the following year in June starting June 22nd of 2013.
Had you been up there before that?
Yes,
Okay. And then, for example, in early June, did you do a search where you yourself drove the road and then went up to the end of the road and searched the Tuckerville area?
I did.
This time, Judge, I'm going to ask you to approach the People's Exhibit 503.
You may.
Investigator Cowing, have you seen People's Exhibit 503 before?
Yes,
Is that a fair and accurate map of the search you did in just driving the road and then the Tuckerville area?
correct.
This time I'd move to admit People's 503 into evidence, Your Honor.
Mr. Moran? No objection. It's admitted.
Can you just briefly explain for the jury the search that you did?
So on this day, I drove all the way up the 12-mile drive from County Road 501 all the way up to Tuckerville, which is approximately 12 miles, and to drive around up top and have a view of the mines and then walk around that area.
Okay. And the map itself, can we publish 503, Judge?
Yes,
The map itself shows that pink highlighting along the roadway. Is that more typical of the types of searches you were doing at the time, just kind of checking the roadway as you went?
yes,
And then did there come a point where law enforcement later that month was going to do a bigger search that covered areas off of Middle Mountain Road?
correct.
Why were you waiting until late June to do that search?
Well, waiting for snow to melt and weather to improve. And then, of course, the pre-planning and getting operations planned and getting folks to help with the search.
Was that going to be a difficult search to do in the winter?
Yes,
So as the search came, were you someone that in the context of the investigation had contact with the defendant?
can you repeat?
Yeah. In the context of the investigation, did you have contacts with the defendant?
Yes,
For example, did you give him updates in his son's case?
yes,
Did you inform him that there was going to be a search on Middle Mountain Road in late June?
yes,
Did you inform him of that on more than one occasion?
I did.
And then did you make efforts to tell him the dates when that search came closer?
Yes.
What kinds of things did you do to try to let Mr. Redwine know we're doing a search? If you want to join in the search looking for your son.
So prior to the big search, I went to Mr. Redwine's house a few times. I made several phone calls.
Did you leave him messages?
I did.
Did you email him?
Yes,
Did you hear back from him about participation in the search?
eventually.
Okay. And what about the rest of Dylan's family? Had they asked to stay informed about the big Middle Mountain search as well?
Yes,
And did they, in fact, get notified and plan to come for the search?
yes.
Where were they coming from when they came down for the search?
From the Monument, Colorado Springs area.
Now, did you finally get a hold of the defendant on June 21st?
I did.
And how did you get a hold of him?
Through telephone contact.
Can you just explain that to the jury, please?
So I was in my patrol vehicle out in the field. I was able to speak with Mr. Redwine and advise him that the search would be tomorrow. And I asked for his whereabouts.
And did you inform him it was going to be, well, what did he say about his whereabouts?
He said he was on the road.
What did he say about why he hadn't called back when you'd left him messages, emails, etc.?
He had said that,
I'm going to object and perhaps we approach on this issue.
All right.
Thank you. I think my last question to you was if you explained why he didn't call you back.
yes.
What did he say?
He said he had dropped his cell phone in the sink and it stopped working.
I'm going to come back to that in a while. When you did speak with him, is it fair to say he was out of state?
Yes,
Did you do the Middle Mountain Road searches without Mr. Redwine?
we did.
Elaine, Corey, and Mike Hall, did they in fact come to town?
They did.
And is this the search the jury's already heard for multiple days was on the hillside?
Yes,
And some of Dylan's bones were found and some, very few of his personal items were found?
correct.
Do you recall what personal items of Dylan's were actually found during the 6/22 to 6/25 search?
I do.
Is it a, well, let me ask you this. Overall, do you remember anything about a backpack being found,
No backpack,
or a cell phone or an iPod,
no cell phone or iPod,
any wallet or ball cap?
no.
Did they,
Pardon my interruption. I may have missed it, but my understanding is that 507 was admitted and we got 503 up.
It was 503.
503, Judge. Pardon me.
Go ahead.
okay. So in terms of personal items that were found, was there a shoe, a sock, and some earbuds?
Correct.
And then some clothing scraps?
Yes,
Okay. Were you able to, at this point in time, determine that it was Dylan Redwine and that you had found his remains?
yes,
Were you assigned to contact the defendant?
yes,
Did you have a conversation with him?
I did.
And did you tell him you needed him to come back to look at some things?
Yes,
And did he ask you what those things were?
he did.
You may.
Investigator Cowling, have you seen the disc that is marked People's Exhibit 142 before?
Yes,
How do you know it's the same disc that you've seen?
my initials are on it.
And have you listened to it?
Yes,
Is it a fair and accurate recording of your conversation with the defendant?
yes,
This time I move to admit People's 142 into evidence.
You may. Well, excuse me, I'm sorry. I guess I was a little quick on that. Mr. Marin?
Well, now the suspense is building. Judge, we'll incorporate our previous objections.
I understand.
We object.
Okay, it's admitted.
So in that call that we're going to listen to, does he ask you about a couple of particular items if they were found?
he does.
And republish 142, please.
You may.
Investigator Tom Cowan, today's date, Tuesday, 6/25/2013. Time is 17:30 hours, so let's call one Redwine, you're my patrol car. Hello, Mark? Hey, Tom Cowan. Hello? Hey, Mark, this is Tom Cowan. I'm calling from Tanya Goldbright's phone. Sorry, man. I know the field of my phone doesn't work on Middle Mountain, and for whatever reason, Verizon does on AT&T. Hey, I'm gonna make this quick. Hey, I would like for you to come back to Durango, so I can have you identify some items of interest. Where are you at? Okay. I would like for you, and I want Elaine to come here as well, so we can, look some things over that we located on Middle Mountain. Okay. So when can that happen? Yeah, it's a reference doing. Just tell me when I can expect you. Just go leave the town here, so I mean, I can probably try to make arrangements, start making arrangements, and I can get sometime tomorrow. That would be good. Yeah, we would like for that to happen. You have my number. I'll be up here at the mountain the rest of the week. But please call me as soon as you get on the road so I can arrange a time to meet with you. I can't go over that right now. I'd rather do this in person. That's right. I can appreciate it. Just to be professional about it. Hey, they're trying to get me on the radio. I'll give you a call sometime. It's on money. Okay. Story, Mark. Yeah, I think I asked, but go ahead. Okay, this part of the cut. Randy, I second. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, okay, great. Give me a call when you're on the road and we'll have a time to meet. And, okay, thank you, sir.
Had you in fact found clothing scraps?
Yes,
Had you in fact found a shoe?
yes.
Between June 21st and June 25th, when you had informed him and he had said his phone dropped in the sink up to June 25th, had he been calling you asking you for updates on the search?
One more time, please.
So we talked about June 21st. You called him and notified him, we're starting the search tomorrow. You haven't called me back. That whole context. And then June 25th, you notify him you have found remains. We already covered that he wasn't present for the search. As the search was going on, was he calling you and checking in about the results of the search?
No,
Did it in fact take him 2 days to arrive?
yes,
And did he meet you at the La Plata County Sheriff's Office?
he did.
Did you notify him of Dylan's death?
I did.
Did you show him items of what was found?
I did.
And then did he have an emotional reaction as you told him that?
Yes.
What did he do?
He started to weep.
I'm sorry, what?
He started to weep.
Okay. And then at that point in time, I think this has been covered, but let me make sure. At that point in time, had you found the skull yet or not?
Not yet.
So you had multiple interactions with Mr. Redwine prior to this?
Yes.
Had you ever mentioned to him the concept of blunt force trauma?
Never.
And have you re-reviewed your materials to check that you didn't say that in one of your casual conversations or something with him?
I did.
Did you have any reason to suggest blunt force trauma prior to finding the skull?
No.
And are you just generally aware that that same day, June 27th of 13, was when Brandon Redwine contacted law enforcement?
Yes.
I want to segue now to August of 2013, after Dylan's remains were found. Did you take further steps to investigate the defendant's home?
Yes.
Did you invite a canine handler named Karen Corcoran, who's a police officer from Wisconsin?
Yes.
And did you know generally that her dog was a dog trained in human remains detection?
Yes.
And did you have some items that you wanted her to check in the case?
Correct.
So what information did Investigator Corcoran have generally going into doing her work in the case?
Just basic information on Dylan arriving by airplane in Durango, father picking him up, eventually going back to the house, and Dylan and his disappearance, and last seen by his father.
And then did you additionally indicate his remains were up on Middle Mountain Road at some point in time?
Yes.
Did you give her any specifics as to locations in the home where CBI had found physical evidence?
No.
Did you give her any specifics as to where you believe the evidence might be located?
No.
I want to start with what I'll call the clothing search from August 5th of 2013. Where did that occur?
What we call the Pepsi building.
What is the Pepsi building?
It is an old Pepsi distribution center that's next door to the sheriff's office at 742 Turner that we county bought.
Is it a big warehouse area?
Yes.
How big?
Approximately 120 feet long by 60 feet wide.
And had the defendant's clothes that he was wearing in the Walmart video been collected?
Yes.
Okay, so generally, were those clothes searched by Officer Corcoran?
Yes.
Where did you guys, who was present for that?
Ms. Corcoran, Investigator Goldbright, myself.
And where did you and Investigator Goldbright stand as Molly was doing the searching?
I recall standing back 25 or 30 feet away, just not to be in the way.
And she's testified, so I'm not going to get into any results. But after that testing was completed, did you then leave and go to the impound lot?
Yes.
Where's the impound lot of the sheriff's office located?
The impound lot is behind the sheriff's office. I would say that's the northeast corner. It's a fenced-off area where we put impound cars.
Okay. Did you decide to run Molly through a test?
Yes.
What did you suggest could be the test?
I suggested to Ms. Corcoran, just for my personal benefit, wanted to see what the dog could do. And I told her there were approximately 12 vehicles in that impound lot, and I knew 2 of them contained dead bodies.
And did you know that because you were involved to some extent in those cases?
Yes.
And to one, did you assist? And Investigator Goldbright was one of the leads on it?
Yes.
And you were present for that car being seized, et cetera?
Yes.
And then the other, were you actually the person that took the body out of the vehicle?
Yes.
Okay, so did you tell her which vehicles they were?
Did not.
And how are the vehicles orchestrated or lined up in that lot?
So typically they're arranged in a U-shaped fashion. So when we have a new tow come in, the tow truck can enter the impound lot without any obstruction and then place a vehicle where they can.
And so where did you stand when she worked her dog?
I stood, we have gates, 2 big swinging gates that lead into the impound. And I remember standing right near there.
Okay. So back away from all the vehicles.
Exactly.
And was Investigator Goldbright with you back away from all the vehicles as well?
Yes.
Okay. Did you give her any other information other than that 2 cars in there had contained dead bodies?
No other information.
Pardon me, sir. Objection as to either of the vehicles, any of the vehicles that Investigator Cowan is not hearsay. I know that he testified that he actually had some involvement in removing the body from one of the vehicles.
We talked about both of them. He said he was involved in the investigation in one, and then he said he removed the body in the other. So why is that a problem?
Well, I guess I just need clarification on which is which.
And even if he just got that from another person, again, under the hearsay rule, it has to be offered with the truth of the matter asserted, which in one sense it is, because you have to know that. But in the broader sense, it's being offered for testing purposes of Molly or reliability purposes of Molly, and therefore this testimony is not hearsay. So you overruled it if there even is a hearsay objection available to you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. In the car where you didn't take the body out, was that a car that you were able to smell the odor in?
Correct.
And was that more of a gory, bloody type of scene?
It was.
And then in the one that you pulled the body out, well, let's talk about that in a second. First, I just want to talk about what Molly did. So did you observe Molly working?
I did.
And did Molly do a train final response on 2 of the vehicles?
She did.
What were those 2 vehicles?
The first vehicle, excuse me, was the Jeep Liberty that contained a male who had died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound and had been in that vehicle for roughly 3 weeks.
Is that the one that you could smell?
Yes.
And then I'm sorry, you said a Jeep Liberty?
Jeep Liberty.
In the Jeep Liberty, was there like matter and stuff in there? Is that where the suicide had occurred?
Correct.
And you said you yourself could smell it. How was it stored in the impound lot?
So on June 18th, 2012, I recall that scene and following the tow truck back to the impound lot and watched the driver put the vehicle in the impound lot.
Do you recall if the windows were open or closed?
They were open
Why?
to air out the vehicle.
Was all of the matter and stuff inside the vehicle?
Correct.
And did Molly ever go inside the vehicle herself?
No.
And that you had said was June 18th of 2012?
Correct.
And you were doing this search on May 5th of 2013? I'm sorry,
August
August 5th of 2013, my mistake.
Yes,
So over a year later.
14 months, yes.
Then what was the second vehicle that Molly did a trained final response on?
The second vehicle was a Ford minivan.
And that was the one that you had directly pulled the body out of?
Yes.
What was the date that you removed the dead body from that van?
It was my anniversary, June 16th, 2012.
So that, again, was within 2 days of the other one and roughly 14 months or 13 months prior, over a year.
Yes.
Tell the jury the circumstances of the van.
So in this particular case, a female had died of a drug overdose inside her van.
I think I understand the court's ruling, but I just need to make sure that our record's clear that this is the part that is hearsay objection.
Okay. And I have the same ruling, so you're still overruled. Go ahead.
Could you please continue to explain to the jury the circumstances of the dead body in the van?
I was an on-call investigator. I heard about the call over the radio, so I went directly there. I did my crime scene photos and everything. And then coroner was called out. It was time to remove the body from the vehicle. And I recall picking her up and placing her in a body bag.
How long had she been deceased long?
No.
How could you tell?
She was warm to the touch, and rigor mortis had not set in yet.
Any odor of a body in that case?
No.
And any blood or biological matter or anything like that strewn about the car?
I recall some vomit, but no blood.
And then how was that vehicle stored?
That vehicle was stored in the same fashion as the Jeep Liberty.
And were the windows open or closed? Do you know?
There were two rear vent windows that were open.
And 14 months later, 13 months later, Molly indicated on that vehicle as well.
Yes.
After that, you had said there were about a dozen vehicles.
Yes,
You had knowledge generally of what's going on in the impound lot?
I do.
So after indicating on those two vehicles, did you then take Officer Corcoran and Molly to the Redwine residence?
Yes.
You had talked already about the information going in, but what did you do when you got there?
Walked the dogs around the property.
Did you ask consent of the defendant in the search?
Yes.
What did you ask him?
I told him that there was a dog team in town, and I would like to bring the dogs to his residence and just walk around the property.
Did you explain to him that it was a human remains detection canine?
I said it was a scent dog.
Did you explain to him that you were going to be looking for the odor of human remains, or just generally tell him you're bringing a scent dog there?
Just generally told him. That's all.
Did he agree and consent to allow you to have a scent dog there?
Yes.
And then what did the dog do outside? And I don't, let me be clear. We've had expert testimony about the results. I'm just wondering things like where you stood, what the dog did, and what you did next.
I recall standing away from the house near the road. It's just like a kind of a cattle guard kind of bridge over a irrigation ditch or creek. Watched Miss Corcoran work her dog around the residence.
And then did she come back and report to you whether there were trained final responses?
She did.
And did she say, was there also a Chevy truck there?
There was.
And was that part of where she went?
Yes.
And then when she came back, did she indicate to you whether it'd be worthwhile to try to get inside the home to do an additional search?
She did.
What did you do then?
I then called Mr. Redwine from my cell phone in the driveway and asked for permission to enter the home.
Okay. And did you get permission to enter the home?
Yes.
And did you in fact enter the home?
Yes.
Did Officer Corcoran work Molly inside the house as well?
She did.
And was it you and Tanya Goldbright, investigator Tanya Goldbright, were the two people with her?
Yes.
Is there anyone else there?
No.
Okay. Where did the two of you stand when she worked inside the home?
I remember staying outside of the home, near the doorway.
So threshold, kind of the area that you mean when you say
Correct.
by the doorway? And then, to be clear, prior to her doing the search, had you done a walkthrough of the home?
I did a entry, what we call an entrance video to document what was in the home prior to us going through the home.
Okay. So you walked through, and then you came back down, and then she was able to go in, and that's where what you have previously described.
Yes.
Then when she worked through the home, did you document what had happened? Just take the jury through what you did after you learned about what was found in there.
Okay. After she was done with her dog, and that's Mr. Corcoran, she did a walkthrough with us and pointed out areas of interest.
Okay. And then she's already testified, so I'm not going to get into those details. But I do want to ask you about the living room itself. So did you had testified previously and admitted people's 124 that was based on some measurements, right?
Yes.
When was it that you had measured the home itself? When did you do that?
That would have been in August of 2013.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then did you create diagrams from those measurements, including 124, but also an additional diagram as to the furniture layout in August?
Correct.
If I could publish 124 that's been previously admitted, Your Honor?
You may.
So this is the one that we talked about before we showed the jury the kind of the layout of the living room and the size of the living room. Is this accurate to November 29th, 2012, when you were in there for that search warrant?
Yes.
And then you had taken photographs of the furniture layout, et cetera, from them?
Correct.
Then was there a subsequent search warrant in August where photographs were taken that had the layout of the living room at that time?
Yes.
And then did you create, I'm going to approach it 125, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you. Does 125 reflect the change in furniture layout between November and August in the residence?
Yes.
Is that, generally speaking, a fair and accurate diagram, even if it's not exactly to scale, just the diagram itself with the layout and some of your measurements?
Correct.
Your Honor, at this time, I move to admit People's Exhibit 125 in the evidence.
Which one is 125? Is that the upstairs?
No, it's the living room we've been talking about.
But not the version that's in front of us right now?
It's August version of the furniture layout.
That's fine, so the same one, just without the blue.
Would you like to see it? That is correct. It's the same one without the blue.
Cool, thanks. No objection.
125 is admitted.
May I publish, Judge?
You may.
Okay. So what's different about the furniture layout here?
Excuse me.
And do you have 124 to reference, or would it be helpful, or can you do it without it?
I can do it without it.
Okay, great.
The couches, the love seat and couch were moved, and tables that were against the east wall moved, TV moved to the north wall.
I'm going to go back to, can you just show the jury some of those items that you just explained? There's a pointer right there, the items that have been moved, and then I can click back to 124 so the jury can see it real quick.
So this, the big couch, this.
Can you talk in, pick up the microphone, talk into it, please? It'll come out. Thank you.
So B was against the north wall. C was against the east wall. The high back Paisley chair was over here. The TV was, where B is.
If I move to 124, is that what you're talking about in a different location?
Yes,
And then I'm going to publish, and you've or lettered the furniture so that it can be tracked, basically. B is that same couch, for example.
correct.
Then I want to publish 470, which has been previously admitted. So in 470, this is an exhibit that Ms. Gumman, who was previously Officer Corcoran, has testified about some of the train final responses. Can you just point out for the jury what's significant about where B was in conjunction with the northeast corner of the room?
So B was at the north end of the room, and with, this would have been in the northeast corner.
Did Officer Corcoran know that going into here, that this furniture had been moved in this way?
No,
So those two blue areas would have lined up at the time that Dylan went missing, at least in accordance with the search warrant on November 29th.
correct.
Thank you, sir. Did you, if you want to grab a seat. And then there were two additional searches, I believe, by Officer Corcoran. One was August 6th and 7th up on Middle Mountain Road, and then a truck in February 13th of 2014, a Dodge truck.
Yes,
Were you present at least for the Middle Mountain Road search on August 6th?
I was.
And in conjunction with that search, can you just explain to the jury how you went about it?
So we brought Miss Corcoran up to the area where we found some remains, and we didn't tell her where we found them. We just let her get out of the car and let her work her way down to where we found things.
So you took her to the general area that was the remain site, and was part of the purpose of this so that she could perhaps find more remains?
Correct.
Was this the area that you had combed over sort of next to each other in those vertical lines and picked everything up?
Yes,
And then she deployed out from, was it like around that trail and that trailhead right there?
correct.
And then did she work Molly off leash for that?
She did.
I want to turn your attention to a different topic at this point. We had talked about the phone that you called Mr. Redwine on, left messages that he later told you was broken.
Yes.
Then so February 2014, let's fast forward. Was there a reason that you had seized his Dodge truck on that date?
Yes, we had a search warrant to recover the vehicle and search it.
Okay, were you present for that seizure?
I was.
And then was the search done at a later date?
It was.
Just related to that seizure itself, can you explain to the jury what caught your attention about Mr. Redwine's cell phone?
Yes, Mr. Redwine wanted some personal effects out of a soft-sided briefcase. I allowed him to go through it, and he was rifling through it, and he picked up an iPhone, white in color.
You recognize it?
Yes,
How'd you recognize it?
I had seen him with it on numerous occasions.
Was it the same phone that he would have had back in June of 2013?
Yes,
And did you have to ask him about it, or did he speak up about it?
he volunteered.
What did he say?
He said, "This is the iPhone that fell in the sink. And by the way, it's working again."
Had he done that sort of in response to you looking at it and seeing it as you had it out?
Correct.
I want to ask you generally about the Dodge truck. Back in November of 2012, did Mark Redwine have both a Dodge truck and a Chevy truck?
Yes,
Was that Dodge truck a personal vehicle of his?
yes,
And was it a four-wheel drive truck capable of going out on trails and roads like Middle Mountain?
yes,
So on November 18th, going to the airport, have you seen the video there?
yes,
And coming through Walmart, et cetera?
yes.
Which truck did Mark Redwine use for that?
He had the Chevy truck.
Were there other instances where you saw him on Middle Mountain Road throughout the pendency of the case in those early months, et cetera?
Yes,
Was there a sighting on April 23rd of 2013 where he was up on Middle Mountain Road?
yes,
Which truck did he have?
he was in his white Dodge.
On July 1st, was he up on Middle Mountain Road at a campsite?
Yes,
What truck did he have?
the Dodge.
In July of 2013, was he up there with an ATV?
Yes,
What truck did he have?
the Dodge.
And was that prior to him using or producing the fishing pole, just prior to him producing the fishing pole?
Yes,
So from all your contacts with him, is it accurate to say that he used the Dodge on Middle Mountain Road when you saw?
yes,
Now, in July, when he was up with the Dodge and the ATV, did you then have a conversation with him at his home related to that?
yes, July 16th, 2013.
And I want to only ask you about one discrete topic in that conversation, but the conversation overall, is this a formal interview or just sort of a conversation?
Just casual conversation.
Is it at his house, for example?
Yes,
Had you been looking for the fishing pole since you got involved in the case on November 20th of 2012?
yes.
Why was it important to this case when Dylan was a missing child?
We were told that the fishing pole was missing from the residence, that Dylan may have gone fishing.
Did that dictate where some of the searches were done?
Yes,
Had the defendant been asked repeatedly to look for it?
yes,
And was the lake and streams, things like that, continuously searched all the way up to the big search on Mill Mountain Road?
yes,
So by July 16th of 2013, Dylan's remains had been found on Middle Mountain Road, and it was known that he wasn't in the lake or the streams or anything like that.
correct.
Had FBI and CBI been in the garage of the defendant's home already?
Yes,
And had you been in the garage with him on occasion, just having casual conversations about the ATV?
yes, June 7th, 2013.
You had eyes in the garage.
Yes,
And had you or FBI or CBI or anyone ever seen a fishing pole in there?
no,
Had the defendant been able to produce a fishing pole prior to that?
no.
So what did you learn this time when you went to the defendant's house on July 16th of 2013?
Went there to talk to Mark, and then he mentioned how he moved his ATV from the garage and discovered a fishing pole behind a washing machine in the garage.
Did he produce it for you?
He did.
May I approach the exhibits, Judge?
You may.
Yes. It was a single piece. Correct.
Can you put it down so the jurors can see Mr. County's face?
Was that one of the locations that the defendant was directed to have looked in general?
Yes.
No more questions, thank you.
Mr. Moran?
You're aware that Mr. Redwine mentioned that he was able to find the fishing pole because he moved the ATV, right?
Yes.
And so it was obscured by washing machine ATV, right?
Yes.
So the movement of the ATV allowed him to find it and provide it to you, according to what he said.
Correct.
I'll go here kind of in reverse order. When Ms. Corcoran was brought out to Middle Mountain, the general direction of where remains and other items had been found was indicated to her, right? She wasn't told, go in any direction. She was shown sort of the trailhead, and it was indicated that she should head down.
Was it indicated that this is the starting point?
And she's testified, and I wonder if you remember, but do you recall giving her more specifics because she needed that for a dog working out in the great outdoors, out where there's more wind variation and the like?
I don't recall.
You don't recall that she was giving greater specificity with respect to the trailhead and Middle Mountain than she was other locations?
I don't recall.
You were in the garage, the Pepsi building, or Area 51 when clothing was sniffed, right?
Yes.
That approach?
You may.
And you were observing the work of the dog in the Pepsi Center, or the Pepsi building, Area 51.
Yes.
And you observed that items were placed out in 3 bags, and then the bags were taken as the dog alerted to the bags, right? Taken off the ground.
Yes.
And then there was 1 bag the dog didn't alert to, right? This one with the blue shirt and the green shirt in it.
Correct.
And the bag was then opened, and the blue shirt and the green shirt were taken out of the bag, right?
Yes.
And the dog alerted to the blue shirt, right?
Correct.
The blue shirt was picked up, correct?
Objection, Judge, going through the findings that the expert witness testified to, I think is beyond the scope. And also it's more proper to the expert.
Well, it's come out through the expert. I think, I'm not sure where he's going with all this, but I'm going to let him do it. Go ahead, Mr. Rick.
I'm meaning to move quickly. I know that this has been heard before, but the blue shirt, green shirt, the dog alerted to the blue, correct?
The outer shirt blue, yes.
And the blue shirt was lifted from the ground, taken away, right?
Correct.
And the green shirt was remaining on the floor, right?
Yes.
And the dog came over, sniffed the green shirt, did not indicate, but went to the location where the blue shirt had been, right?
Yes.
And alerted there, right?
Correct.
There was some discussion on direct about Mr. Redwine being away for work on one occasion when you were doing some searching. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
And you were aware at the time that Mr. Redwine's work took him out of town with some frequency, right?
Yes.
And that there was a period in that winter where Mr. Redwine was out of work, right?
Yes.
And that had in fact mentioned to you on occasion that he needed to make a living, that he had to get out there and get on the road occasionally, right?
Correct.
And you would agree that there were occasions where he searched and he was in the process of organizing searches, right? Specifically, Wendy Ketzinger and her outfit.
Okay. Yes.
Wendy Ketzinger was somebody that you encountered in your work on this case, right?
Yes.
And she had dog teams that could go up in the woods and do searches, right?
Yes.
And in fact, did several in this case, correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Redwine was engaging her to do searches with people that he organized, right?
Yes.
And you, through the pendency of the investigation, became aware of Mr. Redwine experiencing some hostility from people who were coming here from Castle Rock, Colorado Springs, and other folks who developed an interest in the case, Facebook, television, otherwise, right?
Yes.
Also aware that Mr. Redwine's home was vandalized, right?
I can't recall that.
You don't remember the broken window? Or damage to the well?
I don't recall.
That wouldn't surprise you that sheriff's officers were deployed to his house to look into reports of those things.
Yes.
You've become aware that that personnel had been deployed to check on Mr. Redwine's safety and otherwise, right?
Yes.
And there had been a protest at his house. Is that right?
There was an assembly of some sort, yes.
And you know that assemblies at a citizen's house have very strict rules, or it's an unlawful assembly, right?
Yes,
But none of the folks who were directly outside his house were told those rules, at least not by yourself.
correct.
And there was no sort of warning given that this is an unlawful assembly.
Correct.
But those were the folks who went to do the search in June that Mr. Redwine was absent for, as you testified on direct. Folks who had been present at that, what you're calling assembly.
Those folks, present during the 622 to 625 searching?
Yes, sir. Had also been the same folks who were at the assembly outside Mr. Redwine's home.
No, this was a law enforcement search.
The folks from Castle Rock came down to join, and you were suggesting that Mr. Redwine do the same thing, right?
Correct.
And I just want to emphasize this because I think I heard you talking about how you had a video camera available to you when you went to the house with Ms. Corcoran on August 5th, 2013, right?
Yes,
And you used that video camera to video the entry of Mr. Redwine's home.
yes,
So when Ms. Goldbright or Investigator Goldbright crawled through the window and went in the house, you videotaped that.
I don't recall if the recording started at that point.
Suffice to say, though, that you stopped recording once Ms. Corcoran and her dog were inside the house.
Yes,
And that camera had been available to you all of that day, but it just wasn't utilized to record her work, right?
correct.
The sniffing that happened at the impound lot first involved a vehicle that a suicide had happened in, right?
Yes,
And that suicide was pretty gory. It was a self-inflicted gunshot wound there.
yes,
So, for lack of a better word, gory, that the windows had to be left down so that the smell would dissipate, yes?
yes,
And it was, you could detect it. You were smelling it, right?
yes.
And the dog, did it jump up on that vehicle when it was sniffing it?
No,
Jumped up on the other one.
it did.
And your testimony was that the victim, or the human who had died of an overdose in the second vehicle, vomited, as is common with overdoses, right?
Correct.
And that vomit got onto the vehicle, right?
The vomit, I recall, was by her head on a pillow.
Any other evidence that organs, was there, did the person defecate or otherwise expel any other bodily fluid?
No,
It was just a vomit.
correct.
Would have still been present in the vehicle.
Can you repeat this more?
Which would have still been present in the vehicle.
I believe so.
Solo was still there, right?
Correct.
Did you observe the alerts, I think, that you mentioned occurred outside Mr. Redwine's house prior to seeking his permission to enter?
I was told by Ms. Corcoran later where her dog had indicated.
I object for anything further than that because of the same reasons as expert testimony and it's hearsay too.
Anything else you're going to go on that, Mr. Moran?
I just don't want it for the hearsay purpose that Your Honor has
My question was, are you going any further on that?
I want to know whether anything was located in the yard.
Anything was,
Located in the yard
fine.
on this occasion.
then that's fine.
Investigator Cowing, there weren't prior to this August search, law enforcement had not, and you've been at prior searches, so law enforcement had not found body parts, blood, other gory things, human remains out in that yard, right?
Correct.
What Mr. Redwine said to you about the phone was that it had gotten wet, right?
Yes.
And then he talked about how it dried out and it was working, right?
He just said it was working again.
In your experience with cell phones, that happens, doesn't it?
I've never dropped a cell phone in water, so I can't speak to that.
I want to address information you got about the layout of Mr. Redwine's living room. Your first encounter with that, and I think it was Exhibit 125, People's Exhibit 125, where you first encountered how Mr. Redwine had arranged his living room. Would you agree it was November 20th, 2012?
Yes.
And that was the day that you arrived with Investigator Patterson and Deputy Potoff, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Redwine was accommodating on that occasion as well and brought you into the home.
There should be on the scope.
I think it's okay. Go ahead.
Knowing that children will hide in a house, the house was searched by both of those deputies, right?
Myself and Potoff, yes.
Outbuildings were searched as well, right?
Correct.
Every closet was searched, right?
Section that should be on the scope. And also, I think council referenced 125, and I think you meant to reference 124.
Well, that I don't know about, but that's on the record.
That makes sense. I think it is 124.
Okay.
The diagram of the living room, I believe.
All right. However, I do think you're getting outside the scope at this point. So I'm going to sustain that part of the objection.
When you went in the house on November 20th, 2012, with those other two law enforcement officials, were you wearing latex gloves or any other protective clothing, shoe covering, anything like that?
I don't believe so.
And then on November 21st, law enforcement was back in that house. Is that right?
On the 21st?
Yes, sir.
I don't recall.
Did you at any point when you were in that house wear anything over your shoes?
No.
And as you testified, unfortunately, one of the duties of
Can you get by the microphone, please?
a duty of a law enforcement official such as yourself occasionally brings you in contact with the deceased and with human remains, right?
Yes.
You had to take bodies out of those cars that were in impound, correct?
Correct.
You at one point told Mr. Redwine, we were crime scenes that's thrown away a lot of boots and stepped in lots of blood and brains.
Yes.
And that's a true statement.
Yes.
So human blood, human tissue, human hair, those are all the kinds of things that could get on your uniform and work boots, right?
Correct.
Same would hold true for other law enforcement officials that went in that house, to include Deputy Potoff and Investigator Patterson, right?
Yes.
November 30th, 2012, photos of Mr. Redwine were taken at the marshal's office. You know that?
Yes.
And that was after a search warrant had been executed at his home, right?
Correct.
Mr. Redwine showed up to voluntarily.
Mr. Johnson?
On the scope, Judge.
Mr. Moran?
You're under the implication created by counsel's direct examination is that Mr. Redwine was not participating or interested or willing to help law
All right,
enforcement.
I'll allow it to go forward then.
Mr. Redwine,
Judge, could I clarify, because my comments were limited to a Middle Mountain search. And so if council's gonna go through every single interaction with law enforcement on every date, it's gonna be a long time.
Well, I will limit it to some extent, but I think you can go forward with it based upon the impression that the prosecution was trying to, show. And Mr. Moran, we are gonna have to quit in about 5 minutes.
I don't intend to go far into it, although he showed up voluntarily on that day and voluntarily agreed to have photographs taken of himself.
Through a 41 order, yes.
I see. But he did voluntarily give up computer, right?
Yes.
Mr. Redwine was cooperative and understanding.
That's fair.
Please provide admonitions not to talk about the case. Don't, do anything on the internet. Hopefully you won't be doing it over lunch hour anyway. Don't talk to anybody about it. And, don't discuss it amongst yourselves until this case is, until you're allowed to do so after closing arguments. So we will take a slightly longer lunch, I guess. So we'll go till 1:15. And, with that, the race is through.